Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 19 of the Day Zero podcast. I'm Spectre. With me is Z and Auntie. He managed to join us this week. And so we're going to be talking about some cool stuff today. First stuff we're going to do is some shout outs.
Yeah,
First thing we have up is PagedOut.
which I'll bring up in just a moment. I need
Okay.
a I need to fix some things on my end before we.
Okay, no
Well,
problem. We'll just we'll talk a little bit about it and then we'll bring it up when we can. So I think we talked a little bit about this zine when it came out. I think it was a couple months ago. So the Paged Out, for those of you that haven't seen it, it's a fairly new zine that's
yeah. Well,
out.
this is the second issue, and I've got our browser up now.
Okay, awesome.
I don't know if we talked about it or not. I tried to find what episode we would have talked about it on, and I couldn't. I know, like, this definitely would have been up for something that we would have talked about. I don't know if it got removed for some reason, or like if maybe we
I think
caught
we
it too
did talk
late.
about it. I remember talking about some cool stuff we found in it.
Well, I do remember we talked about POC.
Okay, maybe it was that I was thinking of.
Which might be what you're thinking about, but oh no, either way, this is the second issue of it.
Yeah. So I didn't read. I haven't read too much of it yet, but I did see some interesting topics. So if you go to their website, which will be linked in the description in the VOD, we'll link it in chat for anyone in the chat who might be interested in it as well. Um, but they've got some cool topics. Like some of the topics they had in there was they had some weird programming stuff, like SIG return oriented programming. I haven't gotten a chance to read that yet, but that sounds pretty intriguing.
Yeah, I
They've got
don't think
like
that's a new technique. I've definitely read about
I
before,
haven't heard of it.
but
It's new to me.
yeah,
Like,
but I mean, one thing I like is, I mean, the whole premise of the zine here is that they're one-page articles.
yeah,
So there's however many,
that's a good
like
point.
50 articles or whatever, actually on this. I should have actually had the PDF ready to go for this, but yeah, it's basically just one-page articles about, or actually just to quote them, a free magazine about programming, especially programming tricks, hacking, security hacking, retro computers, modern computers, electronics, demo scene, and other similar topics. So while it's not all about security, there are obviously the security topics. I think this when you mentioned the SIG return. There's even like a little thing on like a one pager on fuzzing essentials,
Yep, I thought that was
SMAP
pretty cool.
bypass, faking kernel pointers as user pointers. So there are some security aspects to it. Um, I mean, the thing that first caught me with it was the project is led by I don't know how to actually say his name, but Genvel
Yeah,
or
good
something
luck.
Coldwind. Either way, I recognize his name though. I think it was Legit BS that he was part of, like some of the DEF CON CTF organizing. Might have been Legit BS. Might have been I, the name escapes me right now. He might have been part of the organizers just before Legit BS took over.
Okay,
But I do remember playing some challenges by him, so that's kind of what stood out to me.
okay. I actually didn't know he used to do stuff like that. I've heard his name before. Like, I think he has a YouTube channel with some stuff on it too that has been linked
Yes.
out in the reverse engineering Discord. So that's where I remember the name from. Um, if you got I don't know if you got a chance to look at too many of the topics, but do you think there's like one topic that stands out the most in it that you would be most interested in seeing?
Not really. Nothing, no single thing stands out. But what I like about this is that, as I've mentioned, it's one page papers. So this is the sort of thing that you can just kind of sit down. You don't need a big commitment to kind of go through and understand. A lot of these are going to be one page, not requiring a ton of background, just kind of some cool tricks. So, I mean, it's just fun to kind of read whatever you kind of open up to. I mean, I do say some of them are really kind of standalone. Some of them do require you to have background information, kind of just include links out to background papers or whatever you might need. But I mean, just given the kind of size of it, like, no, there's no single article that really stands out to me. I've listed the few that I took note of. I haven't read everything in here, but
Okay. I think if I had to choose one, probably the most interesting to me would probably be the faking kernel pointers as user pointers. I want to check that out to see what they're talking about there. Like I'm the reason I'm wondering is like how that works around like SMAP, if it's like an SMAP bypass. Because I remember you mentioning that earlier, but I didn't see that topic. So is that the same thing or is that a different topic?
no, there is also just kind of a story of an SMAP bypass. So the
Okay.
interesting thing, I like I said, I haven't actually had a chance to read the one you're talking about, so I can't actually say for sure, but
Okay, it's
I
all good.
believe it is kind of held off in a separate area. Like the faking kernel pointer as user pointers is in like a programming area, I think. I'm just pulling up the table of contents here.
Okay.
Yeah, so faking kernel pointers as user pointers is in the OS internals section, whereas they have the
Yeah.
security and hacking section, and that's where you have the SIG return, the SMAP bypass,
Oh,
and things like
SMAP.
that.
Okay.
Oh yeah, sorry,
Um,
not SMAP, like EP, not AP.
okay, I was thinking AP, although
Yeah,
they're
fair.
very similar.
It
Um,
sounds similar when you say it.
yeah, definitely. Yeah, so I mean, they do have a call for pages, so if you want to write in like the third issue or anything, you could, submit one. I was actually thinking about maybe doing that if I could think of something cool to write about.
So
I
was
don't
I. I
know
mean,
about you.
this
Yeah.
seems kind of open. Like they do have like the Pico CTF write up was one of them, and just some write. I think there was another write up somewhere. I mean, so it doesn't have to be terribly complicated or like some really crazy thing. It just has to be kind of interesting and stand out. So yeah, I actually was thinking the same. I was trying to think of some things. What I remember when PagedOut first did their CFP,
Hmm.
um, I be like before their first issue, I kind of thought, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, but I wasn't sure what to write about or because I was thinking about submitting something, uh, because I couldn't really think of anything that was really cool technically and fits on one page. But now seeing a few of these other papers, like it's definitely a lot more open to just what's cool, what's something interesting, not so much just the
Something
craziest
novel.
thing. Yeah,
Like it
well,
doesn't have to be novel. Yeah.
somewhat novel. It doesn't necessarily have to be your own research though. Although don't
Yeah, and
just
I
copy somebody else's paper.
I guess what I was going for there was it doesn't have to be as practical as I originally thought. Like some of them are more just fun stuff,
Yeah.
like some of the stuff we've covered on this show
Like
actually.
yeah, it's worth they're things that are they're interesting to people like us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I'm probably gonna give that more of a read this week if I can get to it. Something that's coming up fast on us is Black Friday, and you're trying to put out an article about some cool stuff that's going on sale on Black Friday.
Yeah, so I've just got a really like these are just my really quick notes on some stuff for Black Friday that I've put up on our blog right now. Obviously, a link will, as usual, be in the description. I'm going to go through this and cover a little bit more about all of these resources that come up. I can't guarantee there's actually going to be anything out for Black Friday with all of these. But
Okay.
these are companies that have run Black Friday discounts. Uh, I think all of them ran something last year. So, I mean, just as a really quick rundown, O'Reilly Online Learning, they're already at 50% off. You can get them now. They're running till December 2nd. You basically just get access to some of their more private conference videos, some video courses, and a lot of their books and books from like Wiley, HarperCollins, Pearson. Just a lot of access to stuff. I want to say it's like $200 for the year when it's 50% off. Normal like 400. I don't have the price written down.
Okay.
I only used it briefly. I want to say I had access to it for like a month or something through school, like through university. But I can't remember for sure. That would have been several years ago, and I know they've made some significant changes since then. Like the O'Reilly online bookstores closed, and I know that was something I had access to. So I haven't actually used this one, but it's the type of thing that's like, it's maybe not going to have the most security content, but it's the type of thing, if you're going to get up to speed on a topic, you might find it useful to have access to.
Okay.
Um, Contrary to that, No Sarge Press actually has some really good uh, infosec books. They're probably my favorite kind of tech or security publisher.
Yeah, we've
If
talked
they,
about them a bit. Yeah.
yeah, if they run their deal again, it was 42% off last year. This year I'm going to go for Black Hat Go to at least buy that.
Go for Black Hat Go. I like it.
Unintentional, but tough. Uh,
um, yeah, I mean, last year the biggest thing for I think a lot of people on Black Friday, not necessarily for security, but just for tech in general, is going after servers, right? VPS hosts and stuff like that. They go big on Black Friday typically. So last year for me, it was, VPSs, and I think I got Pastebin Pro last year too, because Pastebin Pro always has really good stuff around Black Friday and Christmas time and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
well, it's $20 for their Pastebin Pro lifetime. They've stopped selling like the monthly and yearly membership, so lifetime is the only membership option.
I love Lifetime.
But
Yeah.
yeah, $20. I'm gonna imagine they'll run it again. That's usually what they run it for, $20 for Pastebin Pro. I mean, if you use kind of the private and unlisted paste, I've got a ton of them that have kind of been grandfathered in, just because they didn't always have a limit on how many private and unlisted pastes you could actually have. But there's also, when you do Pro, you get more alerts on keywords coming up. You get access to the scraping APIs to your IP won't get blacklisted, hitting their site, and it has a use for Intel, I believe, for kind of pulling things out like that. Things get dumped there, and just kind of a really quick code share, text dump share, whatever.
You also get dark mode. That's the most important thing. No. And then, so I didn't see this before. I don't remember you bringing this up. VMware Workstation Pro, 35 to 45% off.
Yes, last year it was 35% off for everybody, and then they had a code that was pretty easy to find that got you an extra 10% off for Workstation Pro.
Oh, damn. I paid full price for it. Now I'm kind of salty. Oh, that sucks. All right.
um,
Um,
but yeah,
and then,
so Pentester Lab. Oh no, Andy, I think you've used Pentester Lab before, have you not?
Yeah, I mean, I used it probably about a year ago, year and a half ago, just out of morbid curiosity. I mean, from what I remember, it's pretty cheap compared to other learning platforms, especially if you're trying to go for any type of like certificate. They spin up labs for you. So specifically web application, if you're kind of having trouble, wrapping your head around it, I think it's a really good resource for newbies. So it's actually probably valuable to do, in my opinion, if you're looking to kind of branch into that territory. Probably the most newbie friendly, but
Yeah, and
outside of
it
that,
is it
mainly
is
that and
largely web app stuff though. That's kind of what I saw from it, but I haven't used it.
I mean, I know that they had a few like kind of things like I don't want to say it might have been struts, kind of some of the more emerging stuff that you might be able to see, possibly even Heartbleed, but nothing like I would say reverse engineering wise or
Yeah, like
exploit
nothing at the
stuff.
software like binary level.
Yeah,
It's maybe like like I guess pen tester lab. It's more for like network pen testers. Which I
yeah,
mean, there is a benefit. I've commented. I think when we talked about OSW, I commented OSCP, the offensive security certification, and one of the big things I'd say with that actually makes it somewhat useful is the lab environment that you get. You get access to a bunch of labs. They're vulnerable. You can just kind of run, go play around. It's your sandbox to go play in. Pentester Lab essentially provides you standalone boxes that they'll spin up, and you can go ahead and kind of hack on those. So there is some convenience aspect. You can do it yourself. You can set up your own VMs, and it's a good experience to go and do that. But having it all kind of pre-done for you, you just spin it up, and you get to go and just focus on the attacking aspect, is absolutely worthwhile too.
yeah, I guess the last thing that's absolutely worth mentioning is the Shodan deal they have going on. That $1 for lifetime. Is it okay? I wanted to clarify though. It
That
is for
was
lifetime,
lifetime,
right?
yes.
Okay, so because
Although I don't
sometimes,
think that's still going on. That was like a 1 day thing for their 10th anniversary.
oh yeah, you're right. That wasn't for Black
So I'm
Friday.
going to guess,
My
yeah.
bad.
So usually the Black Friday one's $5 for the
Okay.
lifetime membership. I'm going to guess that they're still going to run that, even though they just ran the $1 thing. And I do have a few other things to mention yet before we move off. Uh,
Yeah, and I'm gonna try to try to see if I can find some stuff to add to that as well.
but yeah, so
After we end this
Shodan is
broadcast.
like basically you get to search the internet for open ports. I think it's searched by banners and stuff, ports. We've talked about a few compromises where there have been like exposed MongoDB or Elasticsearch, and they've mentioned directly that they use Shodan to find those.
So
So I
definitely
mean,
worth it, I'd say,
yeah, I mean,
especially
if you're
lifetime.
going to go and attack random people, I mean, it could be worth it for that. I don't recommend, breaking the law, but obviously there's the intelligence aspect and stuff too, of just knowing what's going on out there, what's popular, and getting kind of that sort of information. A
Yeah.
couple other things. I'll be brief with this. Hack 5 usually runs some discounts, just on whatever. Actually, Binja or Binary Ninja will kind of run discounts. They don't discount their actual product, but I think last year you got like some free stickers and things like that, or could get. Not free stickers, sorry. You can get like discounted stickers and just swag from their store. It wasn't an actual discount on the product. Yeah, Pluralsight, kind of similar to O'Reilly's online learning. $100 off, so coming in at $200. I've used this more than I've used the O'Reilly one. Pluralsight, I use it a lot just for getting up to speed on a project. With work, I'd be given a project on some tech stacks maybe I wasn't too familiar with. Check out Pluralsight for a course covering that tech stack. Just kind of get quickly up to speed before I started on the project.
Yeah, I mean, I've been paying for Pluralsight for a while, though I haven't used it in a while, so But
Yeah,
it
I'm
has some
not
cool courses on it.
I'm not entirely convinced about its value for somebody that's well versed in security already. But it
is more beginner oriented. Yeah, absolutely.
but that's why I said like getting up to speed on tech stack, like it has some benefit. I had that when it was like my work was paying for it, so I wasn't too worried about it. On its own, I don't know. I mean, it's not a bad idea. You can take a look at the courses for free. They just ran a free weekend. I don't know if they'll do that during Black Friday, but this past weekend you had free access to it. So you can kind of check out the course. Even without that, you can check out the courses and see what's there, see what's offered. The security courses aren't all that great from my experience, but they just have a pretty significant wealth of information on tech topics in general and like development stacks.
Yeah, I will say the production on their videos is pretty good. It's just that they don't have too many videos that go into, or too many courses, I should say, that go into like the binary level. It's more higher level, like there's a lot of NetSec stuff on there, but not so much like
NetSec, just like DevOps and development. Like it's very kind of IT focused.
Yeah.
I guess the last couple things are Proton Mail. Last year they did 50% off. And
Okay.
Namecheap just runs some weird deals now where like scheduled, and then you go in, if you're early enough, you get to claim it while they're running that scheduled deal. It was weird, but you can get some cheap hosting and sub-dollar domain registrations with it if that's kind of what interests you.
Okay.
But yeah, I think we've talked enough about Black Friday.
All right. Well, you were talking about some illegal stuff, so I think it's fair we talk about the Monero compromise. So Monero, it's a cryptocurrency, and apparently the website was hacked to deliver cryptocurrency stealing malware. So somebody compromised the site and then uploaded wallets that were malicious. And the reason that this was discovered was because there was actually a hash mismatch between the hashes they listed on the site and the hash of the wallet that people downloaded. I think it was the command line one specifically. But it
Yeah,
was
and I
probably more
mean
than just that one.
that aspect really stands out to me too.
Okay, what do you mean?
Well, just because it kind of comes down to what actually happened. How were they compromised? So as you kind of said, it was a download that was compromised that essentially, people were able to steal a wallet. Somebody mentioned that shortly after they used the wallet, they had their entire wallet of like $7,000 stolen from them.
Yeah, I read that. And I was like, that sucks.
So from that though, I mean, they had access to modify the download. They didn't have access to compromise the GitHub and the GitHub release. And they didn't have access to change the hash that was on the Monero website. So that's why it's interesting, because if somebody had access to the web server to change the download link, I mean, you change the download link and you change the hash and nobody knows.
Yeah, I was thinking about that, but I was like, maybe they forgot, or it was like a careless mistake of not
No, I'm
changing
going
that.
to
But
guess
okay.
that it's a different, because it is a different subdomain. The download server is probably separate from the actual web server.
Okay, it's a fair point.
Because they are on different subdomains. There's I think it was web.monero or just get Monero, I guess. And then the download itself
It's probably like DL dot or something like
It's
that.
download dot.
Okay, download dot.
Yeah, or downloads dot.
Yeah. So they do actually provide the most interesting thing I thought about the article was that they actually provide a link to the sample, or well, somebody that discovered it actually provided a sample. I'm not sure. Did you change this link from where it was first linked, or is this the same one? I'm just trying to look for it.
I think
Okay,
I
this
might
might be.
go ahead.
Yeah, I think I was looking at an Ars Technica post, and they
Yep.
had a link to the malware sample. So if you look up the Ars Technica one, obviously if you're interested
you
in
can grab it
malware
from the
reversing.
GitHub. It includes what they downloaded, I think.
Okay, cool.
I might be mistaken here actually, because I'm not seeing it.
Yeah, it might have just
I
been
might
the
be
issue
on the
that was opened
Reddit
up.
post then.
Okay, but yeah, you can go to the Ars Technica paper, or article, I should say. I keep saying paper. To the article, they have a link to the malware sample. Obviously, you want to make sure you have a secure environment and everything before you run it. But if you're interested in malware, that's pretty cool that the sample is there if you want to look at it.
Yeah,
and
I
I
mean,
think this is a good example.
It doesn't
Sorry, go ahead.
sound like there's too much really novel about this. Just a backdoored binary.
Okay.
So basically, change the entry point, jump to some other code, run whatever you want, and then jump back to the normal binary, and away you go.
Yeah. This is a pretty good example of where hashes like this definitely have their place. If it wasn't for that hash, who knows how long it would have taken to.
Yeah, although
find
most
out that it was
cases,
compromised.
it's usually believed that if you've got access to change, or if you've got access to change the download, you've probably got access to change that hash too.
Okay.
If it's stored on the same website or whatever, it's the hash
definitely.
isn't giving you too much benefit. So having them isolated makes sense.
Which I think they deserve a little bit of credit for too. I think that's a smart move.
Well, we don't really know for sure if it's isolated or not. It could just be like, a different folder or something on the same server. I'm guessing they're separate though, because of I suppose I could look the IPs too. I haven't done that. But, oh no, I mean, the hashes have their use for that, but there are only a few cases where somebody's going to be able to tamper with the file without being able to tamper with a displayed hash, unless you keep your hashes separate from your downloads.
Well, you could. I mean, if your page is used often, you're going to have like an archive of the page. Most likely, you're going to have a Wayback Machine, so you'll be able to see if the hashes change for the same version, right? And that'll be a bit suspicious. But though but
people are a lot less likely to be looking at that versus looking at the hash.
Oh no, that's absolutely true. But I think that is a point worth mentioning. There's still a possibility that even if those hashes that are displayed are compromised, you still have some history through those kind of channels that you can reference.
Yeah, you do. I just mean and I'm not against the hashes. It's just being aware of where they don't work. I mean, the hashes, one of their big uses is more just is my download corrupted?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I mean, you could always create binaries that match a given hash too, or try to have some collision.
Yeah, I did kind of want to spin off the topic. I think this kind of lends some strong credence to. I'm not sure why some critical software, especially things like wallets, where you're going to be dealing with money. I feel like there should be a special program set up for them by like Microsoft or something, so that their programs are forced to be digitally signed or something. Because this obviously isn't the first time this has happened. Wallet compromises.
I don't know. I mean, I don't think it needs to be that. I think just having them signed in general, but then people have to look at it. People have to look and check, is it still signed? Is it still signed by the appropriate entity and all of that?
But that's what I mean. Like, it'd be cool if Microsoft had something where they had built-in checking for certain software. I think they do it for.
I mean, how would this?
Well,
you expect them to know. So is it going to be banking software? I feel like you already have to have signed if you use UWP, or if if you upload stuff onto the Windows Store, I believe you have to have it signed
Yeah, I was
already.
about to say, I think Windows Store or Microsoft Store or whatever they're calling it now, I think those are actually all digitally signed.
So I mean, that's just kind of an opt-in to require signing.
Yeah, so I guess it'd be cool if the cryptocurrency wallet providers would actually make the apps UWP
I'd say
apps
that would
to
be
put them on
better
the
than
store.
trying to have Microsoft decide, okay, applications that do this need to be signed and need a way of detecting that an application actually does that. And
Yeah, it's a good point. I
there's
forgot about Microsoft
there's a big
Store.
mess.
Yeah, I forgot about Microsoft Store because honestly, it's kind of nobody really uses it, honestly. But I think for stuff like this, it definitely that's one place I think it might actually start getting more usage if these cryptocurrency wallets developers would start putting it on something like that just for the security aspect, because obviously when you're dealing with cryptocurrency, security is a lot more of an issue, not only because it's currency, but typically if you're dabbling in crypto, it's because you want more of the security aspect, you know what I mean, unless you're just like really
Well,
curious
there
about
are
it or
many
something. But
reasons kind of go into crypto, but
I know, but security is usually like one of the focus points.
privacy.
Yeah, privacy as well. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know if you have anything to add on that.
Not really.
Oh, good. Okay. So another bit of news that came out was the NSA put out a post about managing risk from transport layer security inspection. So they were talking about addressing encrypted traffic inspection risks.
It
So
might be really
TLSI.
Yeah. I was just gonna say it might
Sorry,
be
what were you
worth
gonna
kind of talking about what it is, but I guess you're probably about to go into that.
Oh no, you can go into that.
Either way,
I
it's
actually had some notes on some other things. So
basically, a lot of companies will have proxies for employees when you're on your network. Use that proxy to actually access the internet at large. That way, they can look for any sensitive information kind of being exfilled or malware, anything like that. And they want to be able to see what's inside of encrypted traffic, so inside of TLS traffic. So you connect to the proxy, and the proxy connects to whatever site you want, like a proxy works, but the proxy itself establishes the TLS connection, and you have your TLS connection to the proxy, so it can kind of read in the middle there.
yeah.
And it's basically just talking about, or it's the NSA giving some thoughts and suggestions about things that people do wrong with when they set that up. Things like not actually verifying the endpoint certificate. So while their certificate to the end user is legitimate, so the end user sees the little padlock or green padlock or whatever, the actual website might not actually be using a valid HTTPS certificate or TLS certificate. So that's one of the risks that they talk about here, is just doing that, or checking the certificate authority. Talks about insider threats, but I think the more interesting thing is, or Spectre, you'd kind of brought this up when we were talking before this, is, why did the NSA decide to weigh in on this?
Yeah, like this is typically a kind of post you'd see from independent researchers or, some of those like groups.
No, I mean, I'd argue this
Like
is
security
definitely
groups.
within what the NSA would do. I mean, because a lot of companies are going to run, like a lot of enterprises, big companies do run these types of intercepting proxies that will go ahead and look at it. So, I mean, it's looking at basically something that matters for the US, matters for citizens. Here's something a lot of companies are doing wrong. It's not out of the ordinary, I think, for the NSA to come in and weigh in on it.
You don't really see the NSA come out very often with this kind of stuff. Like, when was the last time they did something like this? Do you know?
Well,
Do
I
you
don't pay
remember?
attention to the NSA and
Okay,
what
fair
they
enough.
say.
But
I think
it
they
just seems
come
odd.
out reasonably frequently, though. Like, I don't think they're silent. I think we've had a couple other things where at least the NSA has had some say about what's going on.
Okay. I mean, where I was thinking about it was, obviously they are trying to get a little bit more trying to break a little bit more into the security industry. We were seeing that with their release of Ghidra. They're trying to be a bit more friendly. So this might be like a step in that direction. But like the main thing I had in the back of my head when I saw this was like, I wonder if they're seeing an increase in
It's definitely possible.
potential
I mean,
actors trying to pull
they're
off these
not
kinds
going
of attacks.
to, make mention of it if they're not seeing attacks about it.
Fair point.
So I mean,
Yeah, I
I'm
mean,
just
I don't know.
agreeing
It'd just
with
be
you.
interesting.
Like, I mean, yeah, but they've come out with other tools and stuff before. I mean, SE Linux, love it or hate it, did come from the NSA. And they've
Everyone
given
hates it.
various crypto piece of advices, good or bad. I think I recall uh older crypto system, they gave some like a curve that you should use. It was an elliptic curve thing. They gave a curve that was weak to an attack that only they knew about, that hadn't been published in academia yet. So they haven't always acted in good faith.
Okay.
But I mean, they have given advisories before.
Okay. Auntie, I know you've been a little bit quiet. I feel like we're leaving you out. I did want to ask, like, have you seen? Is there much of a focus in like the network security stuff on these kinds of attacks, attacking like those TLS inspection man in the middle softwares?
And I mean, I love hearing you guys talk about it because it's easy for me to go and be instantly like, yeah, of course they're putting it out because this has got to be happening. Then, like, it's one of those things the NSA kind of does every once in a while. They'll just go, hey, there's a bear in the woods, and you kind of go, oh shit. I mean, for this specifically though, I don't think from like most like baddies, as you would call them, you'd see something like this because a lot of times, it takes kind of an intelligent type of person to go and attack TSL or TLSI and actually, go ahead and maintain access, right?
Well, I
Um,
mean, the point of this though was more that weakened security because the proxy isn't actually verifying the certificate of any endpoint. So, I
I
mean, that doesn't require any sort of internal, like, I mean, they do talk about internal or insider attacks also. But their main thing there is, validating the certificate authority when you're actually forwarding that request. I mean, that doesn't require an insider or any sort of advanced threat. That just requires somebody who runs a website.
That's a good point actually, and I mean that really just comes down to then when you look at it, laziness. Realistically, that there's got to be, and there's a whole lot of different things like iron ports that do stuff like this, right? They break that connection, and if it's not built into that, I mean, honestly, who's going to go looking for that? I guess is the way I think of it. I would already assume if I have a product that does this, it should do that, right? Um, so that's just kind of an interesting thought. Is that my whole summary is probably similar to Spectre's? Is that this probably is happening somewhere and has happened a fair enough amount of times that the NSA was probably like, okay, someone needs to be paying attention because this shit's starting to happen too much. So,
Yeah, no,
I mean,
I'd agree with that. That's kind of what I was saying. It is probably happening.
as
Do,
if I've seen it, not realistically, but these are the types of things that don't come out for another year, and then everybody goes, "Oh shit, yeah, this was happening."
do you know, like, if the like we're pretty much in agreement that the NSA is seeing this kind of stuff happening, or they wouldn't put something out. Do you know if like they contact companies individually if they know of any specific cases? Like, is
Uh,
there any private channels or anything?
oh, it's it's kind of like complicated because a lot of times this is the NSA's way of alerting those companies. Like, I would assume they would go if necessary. Like, if someone's been compromised, very, very sophisticated threat, they may, in fact, let them know. And I know that a lot of times that's probably through like agencies like the FBI are typically the ones who triage shit like that. If the NSA is going to directly come to you as a company, I don't know. Because a lot of times the NSA is going to have insight into the types of campaigns that they can't just go and tell you, hey, by the way, this is, this APT group, right? That would be a very bad idea. It would let your enemy know that you're aware of their campaign. But I do know that a lot of times, I don't know if it's specifically the NSA, but there are government agencies that will pass down that information to the companies, typically through, again, either the FBI or some type of trust group is also a very common way, right? So there's 50 companies that are part of a specific vertical, right? Like healthcare. So there's different ways they will let companies know, but I don't want to believe that the NSA would directly come to you and be like, hey, we monitored this, we saw it happen. They would probably find an alternative route, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, I wouldn't think so either, but it's just, I thought it would be an interesting point of discussion because, I have no idea on stuff like that. And if they're monitoring for things like that, you would kind of hope, just from like an ethical standpoint, that they would let those companies know instead of just because like putting out a notice like this is cool and all. It's definitely better than not saying anything at all. But it, I have a feeling a lot of stuff like this, a lot of companies probably don't even take notice, honestly. So,
Fortunately, even if companies are notified, their remediation is more about how do we prevent from being sued as fast as possible rather than how do we fix the problem a lot of times. Which, there's concerns, of course, obviously, about the financial risk. But a lot of times when these things come into place, you also have to realize it's with anything else. How quickly can someone go and start fixing this issue? Is there even a real fix to this? That then you have to go and audit your type of, like, again, if it's iron ports or something like that that's doing these basically man in the middle connections. Now you have to figure out, okay, how do we fix this? What if your particular provider doesn't do this? Now you have to overhaul the entire network to fix this issue. Like there's a lot of complications we've talked about before with stuff like this, when it's probably just easier to kind of like close your eyes and hopefully this isn't happening to us type of thing. Hopefully we don't end up on the news. That's about the best of what I've seen happen most times, more or less.
okay.
And I'm praying. Thoughts and prayers.
Yeah, I mean, in all fairness, again, with this one, like the practical aspect, obviously they do. The interesting thing is they do have the mention of insider threats specifically. Because I mean, the actual attack that they talk about is just basically not verifying the certificate, so it'll wrongly display the padlock when it shouldn't. But the insider threats, I'm even wondering if that maybe is related to. No, I guess I was going to mention some of the other insider threats that we talked about a couple episodes ago, but that probably wouldn't be related at all.
I mean, the thing with insider threats is like there's probably easier attacks to pull off than this, wouldn't you think? Or
Well, no, I
See,
mean, an insider threat would just have to be somebody that has access to the logs. I mean,
I
it's
Okay.
think
not
that
like
that
that's
should be
complicated. It's like a proxy, it keeps logs. Of course it does. There are access logs.
Okay, fair enough.
That information's there. So any IT guy, you give him $5,000 and ask him for some information about who accessed what.
I think the point is too, though, if you realize how they're phrasing it, is that you should have a separate role, who watches the watchers type of thing. If you have one person in charge, which you would be amazed at how often that is the case, one person who manages that, right? As it says, or as Z said, is that if I go and I enable these features, right, that still allow invalid certificates to get through, it still looks secure from a user end because the lock will still come up because I'm man in the middling that connection. So it looks legitimate because you're connecting to my, actual certificate. You're not connecting to the website itself certificate. I'm doing that for you. So it's a very subtle attack. I would say that if someone else isn't paying attention, this could go on forever until someone finally audits it, which may never happen, to be fair with you. So I just thought that's the interesting thing I always go with is insiders tend to be a lot more dangerous because they're already there. They just have to go and flip on a switch. Someone else has to go and break in and do this and that, or again, the real threat that they outlined here. It has to be a invalid certificate that gets through and it's part of a campaign and
Well,
so
so
on and so
that
forth.
the insider threat is separate from the invalid certificate.
Right. Yeah, I know.
They're totally separate attacks.
Yeah, I was just in the context of what we're saying here, besides the certificate thing that is explicitly talked about here. The reason they mention it is because insider threat is still realistically, I would say, the biggest threat to this kind of transport layer type of inspection. But that's too ranty. Yeah,
That's all
no,
good.
interesting article.
And I
Yeah.
think we've kind of hit everything we can with this, or that's
We can
worth.
talk about it for 15 more minutes, right? We can.
Well, I mean, I think it was a cool discussion too because obviously, you guys have a bit more experience with that than me. I've never worked with like internal internal network security for a company or anything, so I think there was a lot of insight there. All right, so U.S. student apparently built a custom Gentoo Linux distribution for ISIS, and also he did a few other things too.
I mean, I don't really want to say it's a custom Linux. if you actually look at the justice document, like the actual PDF there, I mean, it's basically his custom Linux. I mean, sure, it was Gentoo, but it was all about the scripts that he wrote.
Yeah, so I'll mention he created I think one of the things they mentioned was he created a Python script for saving multimedia from social media channels, so other,
Yeah, so I
ISIS
mean,
members
with
could post
this,
it and stuff.
one of the things that was mentioned here, kind of the FBI agent had communication with this guy, and when they're talking about him starting this operating system, and this is a quote out of it. I will begin a new, very valuable project. I will be developing a custom Gentoo Linux uh, designed for ISIS supporters. It can run on any computer, will be very lightweight, fast, and secure. And the FBI agent's notes about this are, I know that this guy, they have background on him already. They know that he's taken several computer science classes like Python for Programmers and
No.
Computer Science 1 and 2.
Oh
I mean, I just kind of feel like
no.
I mean that's his level 4. Yep. So he's probably able to start building his own Linux distro.
That's APT level, dude. That's APT level right there.
But you did hit the right thing there, Spectre. Like his main thing was that he basically wrote some Python scripts that could go from what they called social media platform 1, because they wanted to actually mention the name of the platform. That could download things from the social media platform. Oh, that was something with the distribution. It would only let you access that social media platform. Because having more things installed would make you more insecure, which, I mean, isn't totally wrong. But it's overly restrictive. Anyway, main thing, download those videos that basically bots that can then share them without actually needing to kind of instruct all of the bots manually. And it did some organization of the data. He did voiceovers in English for some of the ISIS videos, some things like that.
Oh, I didn't remember. Oh, I didn't see that. Okay.
Yeah, that was just kind of mentioned in passing while they're talking about some of the videos and some things that he did in the longer justice document.
Okay. All right. Yeah, it's always an undercover FBI agent. But yeah, I was gonna say, like, those points seem pretty shitty. Like, Python for programmers, information systems, computer science 1 and 2, and then then they say, like, he definitely has the capability to pull off building a custom Linux distro.
Which, to be fair, it depends on what we're talking about when it comes to the custom Linux. Like, anybody can go and build their distro with a few tools added on there or removed or whatever. Like, that isn't actually that difficult. I just don't think, like, the fact that he has Python is really the deal maker for that. Like, that feels out of place. Like, it's not like doing a distro is that necessarily that complicated. There are, plenty of websites that walk you through creating your own distro.
It's not even a distribution. It didn't even really go into that. It sounded like he threw out that I'd like to make a custom distro, blah, blah. Like, all he did was, I still don't even find it, like, that spooky at all, because a Python script to automate saving, stuff like that, like, you can scrape. I don't want to start throwing social media websites on. You can start scraping a whole bunch of... Go ahead.
His custom distro included those scripts. That wasn't the custom distro. Like, the distro itself, I guess, was supposed to, like I said, only let people access that one social media platform and things like that.
Hard, though. All the other things, like, again, he talked about lightweight and fast. That's because Linux by itself and Gentoo, if you want to go into that rabbit hole, allow you to customize every part, right? But even the other things, like, again, talked about, I think you said something that he can only access these websites. Like, that's some firewall rules, bro. That's as simple as Google IP tables,
Yeah, I'm just trying to defend that. Like, he could do a distro. Like, he probably has the skills for that. I just thought it was funny that they mentioned, like, the Python and stuff as the examples for that. It's not
ISIS level programming,
but it's
Python's only for terrorists.
But yeah, I mean, that's kind of where this comes down. Like, it sounds like it's almost more fun, building a custom Gentoo. Like, they focus on the Gentoo, and that's really shouldn't be much of a focus because he didn't do all that much with it. But it feels like, by saying that he's building this custom operating system for ISIS makes it sound a lot worse than just the court documents mentioning that, or like most of it seems to be focused on is Python. on
The
those
best,
scripts.
my favorite part of this is at the end. It says the student also worked for 2 months as a software tester for BlackBerry's Cylance cybersecurity startup, right? And the company denies it. And I can only imagine the shitstorm of when that paper came across. Like, who the fuck is this guy? Like, the absolute panic of everyone inside that company going, "Holy shit! No, deny." Like, I don't know if he worked there or not, but dude, that is the worst possible thing a cybersecurity company to have. Is like, hey, do you know this dude? He's a terrorist, kind of. Like,
He
I
worked
don't
for
know.
you.
I don't mean, yeah, like I don't mean to laugh, but like that must have been a holy shit moment for a lot of people at that company.
I mean, one thing I don't know if you guys want to get into it too much, but I did have kind of a slippery slope idea in my mind when I was reading this, just because like obviously in this case he was caught by an undercover FBI agent. And I think that does make it maybe eliminate that slippery slope aspect. But you can pull a lot of like open source scripts and stuff like that to do this stuff with very few or even no modifications, depending on how complex the tool is. So if they can go after people for I didn't read too much of the justice document, but I'm guessing they're going after him for providing tools to like a terrorist organization, and they charge you under that. But like, how broad is that? Like, if you put out a script that ISIS uses to do bad shit with, how
Well,
much does it take for them to be
was
able to
very
charge you with it?
different.
I think the intent is, we've talked about this before, where it's the intent. Like if you're going and isn't that how like malware authors get away with this stuff? Silly enough, right? They go, okay, only use this malware to spy on, your spouse who's probably, fooling around or some weird shit, right? I don't think that's even a law, but they try and make it some kind of innocuous, like we only monitor your business users
For your kids and stuff like that.
It's
yeah,
a remote access tool. It's for the remote access. That said, I mean, yeah, they are going after, like, in this case, it's pretty clear. Like, he did have contact with ISIS and individuals within
definitely.
ISIS that he had befriended and stuff. In addition to these FBI agents kind of being there to see some of the conversations. But, like, it was very clearly intended to be used for ISIS. Like, this wasn't a dual purpose thing.
In this case, definitely, yes. But I mean, like, I think it's
but
worth
I
discussing.
mean, that's
like,
kind of the rule in general, is dual purpose, as long as you can show that you weren't intending it for the malicious purpose, then it's not usually an issue.
Say that most. Sorry, mate. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, okay, that's of the U.S. Is that true in Canada as well? Like, do you know how the laws work where we are?
I believe it's true in Canada also.
Okay, I was just curious about that because I don't know too much on the legal aspect of it, and I just wanted to know if it could become a slippery slope. So it seems like you kind of answered that for me. I wasn't sure on that. Sorry, Auntie, what were you gonna say there?
I mean, it's simple. I think it's one of those things that we don't see a lot of people get like arrested for shit like that if they stay to that weird double edge, like, it's just for, making sure your kids aren't talking to pedophiles or whatever, like if it's on that weird slope for tools like that. But there have been a few laws that have been passed over the past few years, kind of with like trading exploits and stuff like that over certain countries and over certain borders is kind of like weapons like, so there's all kinds of weird dystopian cyber laws that probably could be used, but do they want to do that? I don't know. Probably not.
All right. So we'll move on. So Google is apparently outlining a plan for mainline Linux kernel support and Android. So this is a pretty relevant change for Android. So for those of you that don't know, Android phones, they run basically a modified Linux kernel. It's the Linux kernel, but it has a lot more drivers and stuff that are specific to the phone's hardware. So basically, there's a lot of forking that happens. So you have like the mainline kernel, and then Google takes that and they modify it and make the Android common kernel, and then the SoC vendor then modifies that even further, and then the device manufacturer modifies it even more for the custom hardware that they're running. So there's like 3 or 4 different code bases, like different forks, I should say, that are happening on the kernel. And because of that, with Android, you have so much fragmentation, it's ridiculous, between different devices and different vendors and stuff like that. And that has caused a lot of issues over the years, with patches getting missed it's just overall pretty shitty for security. I mean, the one thing that happened recently was the binder use after free that I went into, that was patched in the mainline Linux kernel over 2 years ago. And it's only now, within the last month or two, just getting fixed on pretty popular devices that people use.
Yeah, and to
So,
be
like,
fair, it was patched in Android too, but not on some devices. Like
yeah,
because of that separation. Um, because of that separation, you kind of have the devices getting some updates and not others. Like that's the root of it, and the fact they're not running right off the mainline kernel.
yeah, and I mean Google's own phones, like the Pixel 2 and Pixel 3 were some of the phones that were affected, and those are Google's phones, and Google maintains the Android open source project. So I mean, even Google, like within their own, the devices, because of the manufacturer and SoC changes in the middle there, there's still patches that don't make it through. So I think, if this can get implemented, I think it'll be a big step for Android security.
Yeah, and I mean, one thing to point out is they actually announced their intent to look at this last year. This year
Yeah.
they kind of do have Android running on latest kernel, but they're not there yet. Like this isn't an imminent thing. They're not necessarily going to have this. Obviously, they're working towards it, and like in terms of security, it would be a pretty significant win if they are able to do that. But this isn't like coming, next week or something. We're still a bit out from this. It's something they're working towards. There's still those driver issues that you mentioned. Is still a big thing or a big issue that they have.
Yeah, so last year, the way I read it was last year it was more of a thought, and it's like, hey, it'd be nice to do this. This year, it's more of a, okay, how can we solve these problems to make it happen? So what you were
Yeah.
mentioning there with like the different devices and different hardware drivers, they mentioned trying to implement like an interface that would make it easier for hardware vendors to use the in-kernel APIs.
Yeah, well,
Um,
so they had like the whole like the HAL interface before, which is something that they actually had quite a while back, and now this is more of a new approach that isn't, because that was a Project Treble or whatever back on Android 8.
yeah, and then now I don't think, actually, I don't even know if they have I don't know if it's just called Project Mainline. I guess that would be
Well, I think Project
the same. I don't
Mainline's
know if that's,
separate. This thing actually, or
yeah,
this,
I don't think they have a name for this new one yet. Because I think they even mentioned, how is there not a silly project name for this yet?
what that
So,
was, I think, with some of their HAL stuff. Yeah, this thing says no mainline here has no relation to Google's own Project Mainline.
oh, okay, okay. So yeah, I mean, they're quoted as saying there's still miles to go. There's no timeline or anything yet that I could see. But I think if it could get there, it'd be nice. At the same time, though, I think it is a little bit of a pipe dream. I'm wondering if it'll ever get there. I have a feeling this is one of those things where
I mean,
it'll
it's the
either, I don't know.
drivers that I think are going to be the big hold up.
Yeah,
Because,
and
if drivers were to be open sourced, it would be a lot less of an issue when, the ABI changes. But because, they want to maintain closed source, and this isn't just Google, this is the vendors actually developing the phone and all that
yeah,
too.
exactly.
It's not just Google at fault here, but that's going to be one of the big issues.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. Like hardware guys, like hardware drivers, they don't want to open source anything. They want to keep everything closed source. They're kind of like, they're working on Android, which is supposed to be more open, but they have kind of an Apple mentality. They don't really want to open source anything.
Yeah, I mean,
So
that's true of most drivers in general too, not just phone, but I mean, it's definitely to their detriment. I mean, drivers are always a big location for bugs, so they can
oh
get
yeah.
away with cheaper development and less secure development if they just make it opaque.
Yep, security through obscurity. It seems like that's going to be something that's not going away anytime soon. Um, I mean, yeah. So basically, if you're a device or a hardware manufacturer here that closed sources stuff for Android, it's all your fault. Just kidding. But yeah, I mean, it would be cool. I think it's worth keeping an eye on. But yeah, this is probably a good. I want to say at least 4 or 5 years out. I don't see it happening within the next
Yeah, I
couple
don't see
years.
it being too soon, and I mean, one of the benefits that has come from Android's adoption here is that the long-term releases of Linux are now good for 6 years. So that is one of the benefits that's going to come out of all of this.
Okay. Yeah, that's a good point to mention too.
I just figured I'd mention that, but we can kind of move on here into the Flan scan topic.
I just want to say that's an awesome name. I'm gonna give it a 10 out of 10 just for the name alone. Flan scan.
Fun name. I mean, their logo is kind of fun too.
Actually, I didn't even really look at their logo. Oh, that's awesome. Love it. 11 out of 10. Yeah, so they released an open source scanner. They're calling it Flan Scan. So as far as I can tell, it basically wraps around Nmap.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it an open, like their release of an open source scanner, because it really is just wrapping Nmap and the few basic Nmap scans.
Yeah.
But one thing I will mention is one of the reasons they've done this is they mentioned that they noticed that they were paying a big vendor for their scanner, so they have to do regular scans for compliance reasons. And they realized it's one of their highest security costs, and most of their features were not relevant to their setup. Honestly, that's so true with a ton of security products, ton of unnecessary features to justify a really high cost. And while many of the features are probably used, any one client likely isn't using anywhere close to all of them.
Yeah.
So this tool itself basically just wraps, as we were talking, it wraps Nmap, it wraps, it does a ping sweep to determine which addresses within the network you give it are online, does a sign scan on the 1,000 most common ports, service detection on those open ports, runs the Nmap vulner script to do CV detection, does a nice little report that can output to file or cloud. And I mean, this is what I think a lot of companies need. And it's really the bare minimum for any kind of large company. Like, you should just be continually looking at your attack surface like that. But, while you can go more advanced, this really is what a lot of companies just need. Really simple to do. And basically what they've done is they've just deployed this in a way that's easily configured, like through a Docker container. And I'll be honest, I wasn't a big fan of Dockerizing tools like this, like tools like you're just going to run, until it was Avast RetDeck, their retargetable decompiler. That was a huge pain to try and run locally, but you download their Docker and it's suddenly very easy.
Docker makes it nice to set up stuff, yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, it makes a lot more sense when we're talking about server components, not just like a one run tool. But it was kind of seeing that definitely, like, Docker does make it easier for just the tool also. Like I was just saying with the retargetable decompiler, absolute pain if you want to do this by hand, but have a single Docker file, and all of a sudden everything's really easy to run. So I don't know, I just wanted to mention, like, I wasn't a fan of Dockerizing stuff, but I think it's the right move for something like this. As long as you've got Docker, it makes life fairly easy to run this.
Yeah. So they mentioned the reason they chose Nmap to wrap around was they prioritize trying to eliminate false negatives as opposed to speed, which I thought was a pretty interesting point. But yeah, I guess the biggest thing is probably the open source aspect. It's written in Python, so it's pretty accessible. It's not, it's not a crazy... it's not going to be crazy trying to familiarize yourself with it if you want to look into it.
Yeah, to be clear, that's their release part of this was done in Python. And Nmap is in Python.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, their stuff is in Python. So, if you want to look at that, I think that'll be useful. So obviously they will never say, but I wonder how much they were actually paying to the point where they wanted to go with their own solution, because that is a huge problem in the security industry. I don't know if we might want to do like a discussion, like a later discussion on this, but like tools and stuff, man, in security
it's one of ridiculous. It's one of the discussions I have up for us, but we can talk about that elsewhere.
Yeah, but I just wanted to mention that here, like, that is that is an interesting motivation for sure. So we'll move on to some bounties. So we talked about some Android stuff earlier, and Google is actually expanding the Android security rewards program. So their top prize now is $1 million for a full chain RCE with persistence, and that involves compromising the Titan M chip. So I will say right off the bat, like, this is pretty cool that they're expanding their bounty program. Android, I think it's always been a bit better than some other programs when it comes to the rewards, but now, like,
I'd say
I think
Google
this is
in
a good step.
general has had better rewards than a lot of companies, not just
Yeah,
Android.
yeah, but I mean, like, I think this is a really cool step because obviously, especially when you're talking about mobile, it's a huge market, in the black market and stuff like that. Like, these exploit chains,
Yeah, so
even
what
the
I
one
thought
they're
was
willing to pay for.
what I
Sorry, go
thought
ahead.
was a little bit more interesting here was the fact they're actually willing to pay up to 1.5 million. And that's
Yeah,
if you find issues on the developer or within some developer preview versions. So basically before it hits consumers, they're willing to pay more.
yeah,
I
I
thought
think
that
that's
was
a
an interesting
50%
move.
bonus. So
Yeah,
it's not
so
only on the 1 million, it's also on the smaller payouts too.
yeah, it's just that raises the 1 million to the 1.5.
Yeah. So I mean, what I was gonna say before was, like, in the black market and stuff like that, these kind of chains, they can run for multi-millions of dollars, not just 1 million. So obviously, it is lower than what you could be getting if you had an exploit chain and you theoretically sold it in, like, the black market. But it used to be a lot lower. So I think this is gonna make the decision easier for people to responsibly disclose than to potentially sell to, like, a hostile government or something like that. So I think this is a good step in regards to that. I did take a look at their Q&A for their program. So there is a few points that are worth mentioning if you are thinking of submitting to the program. Um, for the full payout, they want obviously high report quality and POC, but they also want their patches to follow Google's code style guidelines. And they can't tell you if the bug will qualify for payout without full details, which I think is worth noting because there are a few other avenues you can go to where you can provide minimum information about the vulnerability, and then they'll pay you based on that, and then you give them the full information. With Google, they want all that information up front, which I think is fair because Google, especially with Google, where it's a more reputable company, I think that's less of an issue. There's less of an issue or there's less of a concern of you getting ripped off, kind of thing. Um, and then I think the most interesting point in their Q&A, though, was they said they actually encourage people disclosing information about the issue after it's been patched. They say you can disclose it publicly, and we encourage the open source aspect of that, but there are some countries that are banned because of being on the sanction list. So Crimea, Cuba, Iran, North Korea, Sudan, and Syria. People from those countries can't submit,
For
and
what
as
it's
well
worth,
because
as
of,
far as I'm aware, we don't have any listeners in any of those either.
hey, we might, you never know.
No, as far as I know.
Yeah. Um, and because of conflict of interest, obviously Google and Google partners can't submit to it. But I think this is definitely worth looking at, and I think I'll actually be considering this in the future because I'm trying to get into some Android stuff on the streams and stuff like that. So I think this is pretty cool.
Yeah, I
I
mean,
don't
one
know how
of
much
the
you guys managed to check it
benefits
out.
of just bug bounties in general versus trying to sell is in terms of how far you have to go with your weaponization and how stable things need to be. I
That's a
mean,
good point.
yeah, so Google will pay out for having like a well done POC and stuff, but it just needs to be a POC. You don't need to weaponize it to the same degree, so it's less work. So it is less money, but it's also in some cases going to be less work too.
That's a good point.
Kind of you can disclose it at an earlier stage, things like that. So I mean, that's where I think, yeah, the bug bounties are sometimes cheaper in terms of what they pay, but it is worth remembering that it doesn't take as much work to get that payout either.
I will say that the persistence aspect on the $1 million payout is quite significant. Getting persistence is not an easy task at all. Uh, on anything really, but especially on like phones, especially where you have a lot of fragmentation, like we were talking about earlier. So, the $1 million does look like a big figure that they can put up, and it is, but that persistence aspect
Yeah, I mean, you've
is
got to
needed.
have several pretty decently paying exploits would be involved with this.
Yeah, exactly. So, not too much else to go into there, but it's definitely worth mentioning, especially if, I have heard of a few viewers that were interested in getting interested in some Android stuff, and this might be some good motivation for you to do that. The other big bounty news was the Mozilla security blog. They put out that they're updating the Mozilla Web Security Bounty Program. Not $1 million.
Their payouts are
lot
definitely
lower,
a lot
but
less.
yeah. But if you're less into the binary stuff and you're more into the web stuff, this might be interesting for you. So it says they're doubling payouts apparently for all like critical core and other sites that Mozilla uses, I guess. I think. Did we talk about this before?
Well, we've talked about the Mozilla bounties before. I think last time we talked about the one actually like binary level stuff like Firefox. Whereas this one,
Okay.
yeah, so they're doubling payouts on certain web services that they use, not necessarily websites, but web services.
Yeah, I just kind of got hit with deja vu there a bit because I
think it was just last episode we talked about it. We talked about like the CodeQL stuff, and Mozilla was part of that. Having a bounty on CodeQL for all of their issues and expecting a CodeQL query with reports. But they're also tripling payouts to 15,000 on critical websites.
Yeah.
For the most part, I mean, basically they're adding new critical sites, Autograph, which is used to like sign the Mozilla products, Lando for code landing, Fabricator, Task Cluster. Honestly, I'm not too familiar with any of these, but they have links in their report.
Either.
So
I wanted to go more into them, but
kind of their core sites. So Firefox Monitor, the localization. So these are things that more an average user might. So the critical ones are more related to the builds, and the core sites they've added more things that a user might go on. So just somebody might want to help with localization of Firefox or use their payment service, their VPN, their speech recognition API. Like just somebody might go and use that, and those are kind of been added to the core list. But yeah, they basically expanded a bit. Obviously, payouts aren't as big as Google. Actually, I mean, 15,000 is pretty comparable, I think, to what Google offers for like something on any of their websites. I don't recall offhand for sure if that's the case. But yeah, I mean, they've increased the payout, so.
Yeah, worth noting, although I don't think I'll be as excited for this one as the Android one, just because I don't really look into that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So. But we may have some listeners who do, so we did want to shout that out. So we have, we're going into our exploits segment. So there was an XSS.
Finally getting to some exploits.
Yeah, I know, it's a bit later than we usually go into it, but So XSS in Gmail's AMP for email through DOM clobbering. So this one was a bit insightful for me because I'm actually not too familiar with. I wasn't too familiar with the DOM clobbering term, so I will clarify that since it is in the title. DOM clobbering, as far as I could read into this article, is basically how you can access DOM elements by ID, but like you don't have to use the get element by ID JavaScript API function. You can use like the window dot and then ID.
Yeah, just to rephrase that kind of a little bit.
Yep, go ahead.
Is that essentially this goes back to kind of an older JavaScript / HTML feature where when you'd create an element and you had kind of like the ID equals, a lot of people will write their JavaScript doing document.getElement by ID or using a query selector. But kind of an older feature is that ID will actually be exposed in the window object. So that's kind of what Spectre's saying. If you create like, your element div ID equals whatever, you can then also in your JavaScript do window.whatever and get access to that ID.
Which I've absolutely abused in browser exploits because those are very useful. But I didn't know that was the term for that. So,
so DOM clobbering itself is the term not necessarily for that, but for when you overwrite a value that's in the window using the
Yeah.
div. Like you're clobbering that value. And then AMP
Yeah,
for
I just
email
wasn't
is
familiar
kind
with
of
that term.
Google's attempt to, take their whole AMP idea and put it into your email, so you kind of have more dynamic emails or emails that can actually do things. So it's like limited tags. You can set up like templates, kind of some responsive stuff in there. Not getting to run your own JavaScript, but trying to be at least a little bit more dynamic, having forms involved with that. And it is a restricted access thing. Like you have to register with Google in order to be able to send these AMP for email messages. But it's basically Google's attempt to bring more dynamic emails to the world, or to Gmail at least.
Yeah. One thing I spotted in this article was Securitum. They actually, in the article, they actually complimented Google a little bit. They said AMP for email has a strong validator, which I thought was interesting because when you look at a lot of these types of reports from companies, they either kind of shit on the company, like saying, "Oh, this has tons of issues and this was just one," or something like that, or they don't really praise the product at all. But they actually do say that it has a strong validator. I thought that was pretty interesting.
Yeah,
It's not
I
something you
mean,
see too
Google
often.
is a company that's reasonably well respected in that regard, like in terms of security and
Oh yeah,
stuff.
yeah. I
Like,
just
I
thought it
don't
was
see
like it's
people.
not something you see often.
Yeah, I don't see people talking against Google though.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, one thing that can give them a bit of credit to that is if you look at their timeline at the bottom of the page for their fix of this issue, it was reported on the 15th of August, and it was confirmed fixed by the 12th of October, and it was actually fixed even before that. So it was pretty quick response time as well. And the exchange actually looks pretty, friendly too. Like, this bug is awesome. Thanks for reporting,
Yeah, and I mean, this
So
is a cool bug. I do like this. It's one of those things where it's a few different things that kind of fall apart in areas that a lot of people don't really think about. And I mean, a lot of that comes down to, you're not usually um like a lot of people are going to have their variables stored in some other scope beneath the window, not right at the window level. Although that's not always true, but I mean, and having a sandbox that actually takes HTML isn't a common feature. It's there, but most websites, like most places, that's not. They don't offer that much control.
that is an interesting point, though, is like how many people are really using this? Because I'll be honest, I didn't really hear about
Well, that's why I mentioned you
Gmail
have to
AMP beforehand.
register to be able to send this. Like, you have to go through an approval through Google. Google has to approve you to actually send these AMP for email messages. You can't just send it. Google has to approve you to send them. They have to approve your mail server. They have to approve the address it's coming from in order to be able to send these to people. So there are companies using it, but there is a pretty restrictive process to go through, and you have to demonstrate what type email you're going to be sending. I'm not sure if you change it, if you have to update them. But
Yeah,
that limits the attack surface of it by a significant degree.
yeah, definitely. I'll be honest, I was a little bit lost on the bug just because they like it starts off really like accessible. But I don't really do a ton of web stuff. So when it started talking about like the HTML collections and stuff like that, I wasn't too familiar with that.
Well,
I don't
it's
know if
just
you
an
want to
array
shed
of.
any light on that
Well, it's
as
just like if you have the same ID used multiple places, you get an array or a collection.
okay, yeah, fair
That
enough.
was all they were talking about, was if you had that. They talked a little bit about how they can get kind of a second level, so controlling a property of the window dot property. Because in order to do this exploit, and since we haven't actually kind of given the gist of it, the basic idea of this exploit was using this DOM clobbering. They're able to overload amp mode dot test location dot protocol, which gives them control of a particular, or basically gives you control of the start of a URL. So then when it tries to load this JavaScript off that URL, it's attacker controlled JavaScript, and you have code execution. And I mean, so Google does have some protections against it, like your IDs actually can't be certain values, but this AMP mode just happened to not be restricted. whereas all the other ones were.
Okay.
So it was just kind of a bit of luck with that. But yeah, essentially using the ID and then using the name to kind of get the other property set. Like you get control of that value. There was another value, local dev needed to be true, also under amp mode.
Okay. I mean, one thing I could see with this is this looks like another problem we're probably going to see in a CTF in a year or two.
Well, it's something that was already in a CTF. He actually mentions that this was, or maybe that was just talking about the CSP stuff. Yeah, that was probably just talking about the CSP stuff.
Yeah, I think he actually mentioned, the trick was already used in a CTF in 2016, but I think this bug specifically might be, something might be built off of like the idea.
Yeah, actually, so that actually brings up some maybe to mention here is the trick that he found when dealing with CSP is you can have CSP, which will basically, among other things, CSP is somewhat complex, but one of the things you can do is you could specify what directories or what URLs you can load scripts from, like what sources are valid. So you can give it a directory. So what can be done is if you encode with just like %2f your slash, if you encode your slash and do like ... %2f, it'll still treat it as though it's under the actual directory. It won't parse your ... slash as though it's actually traversing up a level, which is what it's doing. And when the browser actually makes that request, it'll traverse up the directory. But because of the %2f being encoded that way, it won't actually, basically the CSP test for it being under some directory will pass. So you can load up files from other directories and kind of bypass that directory level CSP.
Oh, that's pretty neat.
So that's the trick that's being talked about being used in a CTF.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I kind of want to look into that now. That sounds kind of interesting. But yeah, so for anybody that's interested in like XSS and stuff like that, this is definitely a good article for you. I'm not too far into the web stuff, so yeah,
it's definitely a
go
clean
into
write-up. Like I thought it was pretty straightforward how it actually got through everything. Like I said, it's taking advantage of a pretty old feature, and yeah, you kind of a set of things here that like a perfect storm of issues.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk about VNC. So Kaspersky put out an article on VNC vulnerability research. So they looked at a few different VNCs. They looked at LibVNC, TightVNC, TurboVNC, and UltraVNC. I'll be honest, I've never used any of these. I don't know if you have, Z or Anti.
So I have, yeah.
Oh, you have? Okay, interesting.
I've used Tight.
Okay. So I'm not sure if it's mentioned on this page, but the article that I was reading said that they found 1 vuln in Turbo, 4 in Tight, 10 in Lib, and 22 in Ultra. So I think we have a clear loser here if we were doing
with
a leaderboard.
That, they only call out one of them. They only call out TightVNC.
Yep.
And I think it's actually I don't get what's going on with this. So first of all, bunch of issues that Spectre's kind of already been mentioning. Like, what's the number? 30 some issues? Do they have it on here? I want to say it's a total of 37 CVs. Most of them come out of so you're mentioning come out of Ultra. Is that the one?
Yeah,
so Ultra. I can't find my notes for some reason. Yeah, most of them come from there. A lot of these are like old 90s style vulnerabilities, Stack Overflow, straightforward, no canaries. Obviously now you've got the ASLR mitigation in there and stuff, but the actual code itself, and some of these actually do date back to the 90s. One of them, the code dates back to like 99 or 98. That said, they call out TightVNC because they refuse. What they say here is the creators of TightVNC no longer support the first version of their system, and they refuse to patch the vulnerabilities detected in it. This is a weighty reason to consider moving to another VNC platform. Here's my issue. 1.3.0 came out 15 years ago. I don't think they need to keep maintaining it. 2.8, Is their latest release. I don't actually have the date. I know 2.8.11 came out last year, but they're up to like 2.8 27, I think, or 28.
Yeah, I don't think it's reasonable to expect them to support something that's
Well, I don't get
long
why they
out of life.
tested 1.3 instead of the 2.8 series.
It almost seems kind of cherry picked because they knew they'd find more issues.
Yeah, so to be fair,
Like,
I
you
can
know.
see one reason being the license change. So maybe they saw that more people were still using 1.3. And if that's true, people are still using 1.3 because of the license change. Absolutely, they should move off to another VNC platform, but that's just common sense. Don't use 15-year-old software. Just period. Just use
But
things that are maintained.
I think even if that was the case, they would have mentioned it though. Like, I don't know. I think they should have to justify like why they're putting out a blog post kind of going after software that's 15 years old and saying the vendor is like
Yeah,
potentially
because that's the only
irresponsible.
vendor that they call out like that.
Yeah,
Everybody else patched their stuff, though.
I think Ultras. If you were gonna go after one, it would be Ultra because 22 compared to like 4 and 10, like it's more than double the amount of issues you found. And I think even Tight was one of the lower ones. It only had 4. So, I mean, on one hand, no, you know what? I was gonna say like because it's only 4, maybe they could have gone back and patched them, but no, 15 years, it's not reasonable to expect them to,
Well, it's just
go
out of
back and
support. It's out
put
of
security
life.
stuff.
I
Yeah,
wouldn't
it's not
expect them,
reasonable.
period.
Yeah. They did say all bugs were all of them were linked to incorrect memory usage. So I'm guessing buffer overflow type stuff,
Yeah, and
maybe, use after free, stuff like
if
that.
you look at what some of the issues are, I'm not even sure any of these were use after freeze, but like so one
Oh,
of
okay.
them here actually, I guess my favorite one, is this one in Turbo. And if you look at their code here, you've got the data on the stack, the 64 bytes, and then it'll just read in the data, and then it checks the length to see if it's too long. So you've already overflowed it, and they call this out here. That's basically what they say. Like they check it, they check the length after they've already read the data in.
That's
So
awesome, dude.
it's kind of a useless check there. You've already got your control because they read it in.
Yeah, that's really weird, dude. I know this was probably from the 90s, like you were saying, but I don't even know how you could do that
I'm
back
not
then.
sure
But
if this one was.
yeah,
The one that
I'm
was
willing
from
to
the
like give them the
90s.
benefit of the doubt that it was, but
Yeah, so the one from the 90s they actually do call out because both fragments were copied from this AT&T lab code. So the developers introduced it back in 1999.
okay.
But yeah, a lot of them are things like the reading basically user controlled lengths. So you control like the malloc length, and you can exploit or like you can do overflow in the heap. There are a lot of really simple issues like that.
Okay. So, I mean, you said you were a TightVNC user, so are you reconsidering your life
Oh,
choices
I'm
now
not a
that they're not going to
TightVNC
patch?
user. I've just used TightVNC before.
I'm just saying, like, are you ashamed of using it before since they won't patch 15-year-old software?
Well, no.
I'm just kidding. I just made it
It
too.
was never like a big part of my use anyhow, but it said one of the other things, this is just kind of a fun thing, but in TightVNC, one of the things was that it would read into a fixed length buffer. So basically you can overflow it. And this was in LibVNC also, but they stored function pointers as like the next section in memory. So that makes exploitation pretty easy.
Yeah, pretty damn easy. Um, one thing I think that's like the fact that they're able to find, excluding TightVNC, because TightVNC obviously they looked at an older version, so I'm just not even going to count it. But some of the other ones, is it just that like VNCs aren't really looked at, but from a security perspective, very much? Is that why they have some of these like fairly
Um,
lower hanging fruit type issues?
I don't know. I don't know
Because I
how
think that'd be
often they're
interesting to look
looked
at
at.
is why that's the
VNCs
case.
kind of feel like one of those things that maybe have slipped through the crack because a lot of their code Like, a lot of them are fairly old and just kind of have a bunch of features added on and added on and added on. I can't think of any VNC that is terribly modern. There probably is, like, don't get me wrong. It's just I can't think of any.
Okay. Auntie, did you have any thoughts on that? Just on like the VNC stuff from a security point of view?
Not particularly. I'm not very familiar with a lot of the VNC stuff. Realistically in the wild or anything outside that, it almost always seems like academic, similar to this. So, I mean, it's
Well, I
about
mean,
as deep for
VNCs
me.
are absolutely used. So like I've used the main one that I have actually used is Real VNC. But that's more like I believe they have, I think the server's paid, I want to say, but like as a viewer, is free if I recall correctly. I might be mistaken there, but like VNC is definitely used, especially enterprise level, because I mean it's used anywhere like you'd use TeamViewer, Join Me, things like that, except more or less open source or self-hosted at least. So I've used it when, if it's with a client or something, we don't want like a client hosted application or something. You don't want to have your client stuff going through TeamViewer and letting TeamViewer have access to everything you're doing or something like that. So it's definitely used on like the enterprise level.
Okay. So on the other side of the fence with Kaspersky, there was actually a disclosure announcement about arbitrary file capture issue in Kaspersky Total Security 2019, which is like their like antivirus solution.
Yeah, consumer level antivirus. The issue is kind of fun, really simple too. The issue is just their backup and restore functionality. It runs a system with like Windows system sets. Systems more or less your root. Admin on Windows isn't quite as powerful as root is on Linux, but systems more or less root. So basically that process runs a system, so you tell it, oh yeah, I want you to back up this folder that's owned by somebody else. Or, more likely you tell it to back up, system32 so you can get access to the SAM file. Which is where Windows stores passwords.
Yeah, it's like passwd or whatever on Linux, or Shadow. Is it
more like Shadow.
Yeah, I was thinking Shadow. Yeah, my bad.
But yeah, I mean, it's just do that, restore to location you control, and you can get files that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. So it can be used by somebody with minimal access to the system. That said, there are usually like kind of defenses against programmatically changing settings like this and doing that. I don't know for sure if Kaspersky has that, but usually there are some defenses, so it's maybe not going to be a target for malware to use. And, this is a consumer level. This isn't their endpoint protection product or like enterprise level, which they have separate products for.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of a fun issue. I did want to talk a little bit about the like heart of the issue, and it seems like the heart of the issue is that on a Linux system, the access control lists, or ACL, they're basically ignored. So, usually like on Windows, if you try to access the backup, it would respect the access control lists, but when you try to do it on Linux, it won't. So if you like back it up onto a USB or something like that, and you take it onto a Linux system, you can access those files.
Yeah,
I
so
mean,
that's
it's
actually, I
definitely,
believe, part of that's just stripping out like the owner information when you toss it onto the USB.
yeah. Like you said, it was a pretty fun issue. That being said, I don't really see it being you need a pretty high level of access to pull it off. I don't know if it's a very practical attack,
Well, no,
especially
you
where,
can
like you were
be
saying, it's not at the enterprise level. So
no, but you don't need a high level of access. You need to be a local user. So I mean, yeah, okay, that's a high level of access in a sense because you do need to be local. But on the flip side, we're talking about attacking an antivirus. We're usually not talking about remote exploits anyhow. It's usually these local privilege escalations.
okay, fair enough.
So, like, I'd argue because, you don't have to be a privileged user to take advantage of this.
I mean, would this attack still work if you exfilled it over network instead of? I guess it would.
Possibly. I
Yeah, they
mean,
don't
as
really
long as
say.
you're
Like they demonstrate a USB. They don't really talk like.
yeah, so
I
you
guess it
kind
would
of
work.
mentioned the stripping permission stuff, or well, I mentioned that in response to you mentioning that. I don't know if you actually have to put it out to USB though. It might just be, as long as it restores to somewhere you own, like a directory you're in possession to read.
Yeah,
It doesn't necessarily even keep any of the owner information.
I would think you could exfil it over network, not just USB.
Yeah,
So
I
I
don't
guess
think
that would.
USB is related to it at all. I think it's really
Yeah,
anywhere,
so I
but
guess
that
my
might just
initial
be
thoughts are.
perhaps at its functionality level. It might prefer like saving things over to USB or something. I don't know. Either way, I mean, I think the core of the issue is just it runs a system and doesn't look at what you as a user should have access to.
Yeah. So fun issue. Take a look at.
Fun issue, fairly simple to understand, I think, at least the core of
Oh
it.
yeah, it's a very high level issue. All right, so bad binder. So those of you that were able to catch my streams a few weeks ago and that check out our blog will notice that I looked at the CVE 2019-2215. I've actually looked at it so much that I remember the CVE number, which is kind of sad. But yeah, so they put out Project Zero, actually. Maddie Stone put out a blog post about it on the 21st. And I was pretty surprised because that was a good, I want to say, month or two after they put out the initial report. So I honestly didn't think they were going to put anything out on it, which is why I put out my blog post. But it seems a little bit late, but they put out a blog post too on the exact same issue I was covering. So you know I think it's kind of cool just because my blog post and what I was doing on the stream comes at it from an aspect of trying to figure out how like an already written exploit works, doing a bit of reversing to see how it works on my version, and then focusing on the exploit aspect. Whereas their blog post focuses a little bit more on the bug, and they talk about how they actually heard about it. They heard about it being exploited in the wild, and they talked about how they went back and tried to find the bug that they were abusing. So I thought that was pretty cool, and I think it's worth checking out, especially if you checked out my blog post. I think this might offer some additional insight into the binder use after free.
Yeah, so I thought it was interesting. This kind of talked also about so one of the things you were kind of surprised by one of the techniques used. Um,
The IOVEX stuff, yeah, the
yes, yeah, I was
IOVEX
just
spread.
trying to find it here, but yeah, you were kind of surprised about that. And this talks about where that idea came from, which was a unorthodox or exploiting unorthodox use after freeze, I want to say.
I think it
It
was a
came from the
Black Hat talk. I
presentation,
think it
yeah.
was exploiting unconventional use after freeze. I think was the name of the talk.
Unconventional, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The art of exploiting unconventional use after free bugs in the Android kernel.
Yeah. So,
So it would have been
yeah.
helpful if you knew about that beforehand.
Oh well, life sucks.
You know
But
what? Honestly, working through it the way you did, and some of the videos are still available in like the through Twitch, I believe you can still watch some of the videos. I might be mistaken; it has been more than 14 days, but I still think some are available. Um, having worked through, uh, trying to figure it out on your own, I imagine you understand it a lot better than just having it described to you in that video.
yeah, I mean, yeah, working through it definitely gives you more insight than just like reading the write up or anything like that.
Yeah.
That being said, you were mentioning about like the videos and stuff. I am a bit late on it. I did hope to get around to doing it already, but I am going to be doing a super cut of all the streams and stuff and do like a master video and put it on YouTube. So, I think the stream overall was probably like 15 hours or something like that. So the video is not going to be 15 hours. I'm going to try to cut it down, hopefully to like a few hours, maybe 3 to 4. I don't know
2 hours,
exactly how I'm going
or
to cut it yet.
maybe even do an overview. That's even shorter, but either way,
Yeah,
I
maybe
mean,
that.
we do want to start producing more YouTube content, and I'm just going to briefly mention we didn't do actually 2 Friday streams in a row now. First one, my ISP kind of screwed me over this last week. I'm not sure what was going on. but I was dropping like 10 to 20% of my frames when I went to start the stream, and couldn't get a fix on that. So that happened. So I'm just going to do a write up on the PHP thing. I don't think I'm going to end up streaming it at this point.
Okay. All right, so that's all good. So we will hopefully be back on track for streaming this week. If C is still having problems, and I'm going to try to stream on Friday, going back to some of the Android stuff. It is a bit out of place, but I think that is a good place to bring it up, because we should have brought it up at the start of the episode, but we just kind of forgot. So somebody in the chat, Subvision, did you try rebooting?
Yes, I did try rebooting.
Oh, okay. All right. That clears that up. But yeah,
I also tried turning it off and on again.
Oh, there you go. But yeah, I think even if you read my blog post, I think it's still worth checking out. I'll reiterate for those of you that haven't read my blog post yet. The way that this was exploited was pretty neat, using the IOVEX stuff. And I've been doing some kernel exploit stuff for a little while, and this was kind of like a novel thing to me, that kind of gave me a new perspective on how to exploit some bugs. So definitely worth the read. And these guys did some really cool stuff. So did want to shout that out a little bit. So we'll move on to some papers. So we got building fast fuzzers. So did you manage to catch the Gamozos? Am I saying that right? Gamozos lab stream?
No, I didn't see the stream, but I saw you talking about it.
Okay, so this is a paper from these two researchers, Andreas and Rahul, I want to say. So they're at CISPA. And the paper is basically talking about, the whole premise of it is that people who build fuzzers aren't too concerned with performance. And because of that, they might be running slower, and they might be not getting as many results as they would want if it were sped up. So they talk about some metrics like throughput on like grammar generation and stuff like that.
Yeah, I want to comment really quickly that I feel like part of that comes down to the fact that you're writing a fuzzer. It's usually some that is going to be long running, and at least the common thought is probably more along the lines of, who cares if this part's slow? I mean, the whole program's slow, which is kind of running forever. It's more about your generation method, and if it's going to find the unique paths, if it's going to find the exploitable paths, and less about how quickly it's actually less about the performance of the program itself. Like, I think that's probably why nobody really cared to do any performance enhancements on the fuzzing aspects itself.
Yeah, definitely the results of what it finds is way more important, and like code coverage is a lot more important than the performance metrics.
That tends to be more defined by how you're doing your test case generation than how quickly you're generating tests. I mean, it's fair though. Like, the more tests you have, the more chance there is to. That's like, it's totally fair to look at building fast fuzzers. I'm just saying, like, the common thought has probably been along that line.
Yeah. So Gamozo started a series, because I think this was actually his first episode. He had like S1, E1 or whatever in his stream title. So I think he's doing a new series on looking at papers, especially related to fuzzing, because that's like his area. So it was a really cool stream. It was pretty insightful, I thought. So he was looking through it, and like you were saying, like, I think the paper authors go through that too, is that not many people focus on the performance, and they want to kind of highlight that. But there were some issues with the paper. So they talked about using some techniques to, like, optimizations at like the assembly level and stuff like that to generate grammars quicker. And the way they were measuring that was through a throughput of like kilobytes per second. And the problem was they were basically comparing. So obviously they want something to compare to, right? They want to compare their fuzzer prototype to, fuzzers that are already out there. The problem was they seemed to kind of cherry pick which fuzzers they were comparing against. Like, they picked one from the, I forget the name of the book, but there's a fuzzer, a book on like an introduction into fuzzing kind of thing, right? It's kind of like a tutorial for fuzzing. and they have an open source fuzzer as a reference in the book, and they benchmark against that. And what Gamozo was saying there, and I kind of agree, is that it's not really fair to compare against stuff like that because they were not focused on performance at all. The goal of it was to teach, to try to inform people about how fuzzing works and stuff like that. And as like example code, it's not going to be cutting edge. It's not going to be something that's people are trying to get better performance on. So it's not really fair to compare against that in terms of metrics. The other thing is their metrics were also a bit weird. I think at one point they mentioned like after they did some optimizations and stuff, they had like 14 megabytes per second throughput on their random generator, which was actually like even lower than when Gamozo tested it. I think he got like a lot higher. So their metrics were a bit weird, and they didn't really say too much about the hardware they were testing on. I think they said they were testing on a i5 processor, but that's all they said. They just said i5. They didn't say the exact model.
Yeah, that
He had
doesn't
to
really
actually
give you much.
Yeah, so he had to kind of use like I think they mentioned like how much cache it had and stuff like that. So he had to kind of use the specs to look up what they were using. But in a white paper, obviously, you want that information, especially when you're talking about measuring performance. You want the information of the hardware you're running on to be
Yeah, well, in general, you want
very
repeatability. You
accessible.
want somebody else to be able to come by and repeat your research, validate it.
Yeah. So they put out their I think they called it their F1 fuzzer, so you can take a look at it on GitHub. But I think it's also worth shouting out. Gamozo basically tried to beat theirs. I thought it was really cool. He did like a stupid long stream. I think it was like 12 hours long. It was a really long stream, but he tried to like use their concepts, I think, and he tried to like build his own fuzzer to try to beat it. And I think in quite a few metrics that he did, he actually did end up beating it by up to like 4 times faster. He did it in Rust. So let me just see if I can bring that up because I think he called it F0, playing off theirs. But I think it'd be cool to kind of take a look at the differences between those two. It could be insightful to do that. I can't really. It's hard to find. I I went into a Google tab to try to find it, but it will be in the description if I can't find it on there. I tried looking
Well, it was
for
just linked
F0,
actually
but...
by Subfission. I'll open it here.
Oh, was it? Awesome, dude.
Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, so he wrote it in Rust, and it's pretty cool that he did that. And I think I'm going to be watching more of his streams, looking at white papers and stuff. But if you scroll down a bit, you can see the benchmarks. So F0 for depth equals 32, or actually depth equals 4. It's 5,000 megabytes per second, and F1 is 1,200. So that's a 4 times speed up. And as the depth gets higher, the speed up decreases, which kind of makes sense. Like when you get down to 64, it's only 0.94 times speed up. But
Well,
what's that?
that's not really a speed up.
Oh no, you're right. Actually, it's slower. Fair enough. But yeah, like I think it was cool that Gamozo obviously is pretty much an expert in the area of fuzzing. So it was really cool to have him go through the paper, and I actually found his like review of the paper more interesting than the paper itself. So, he kind of
Can you talk a bit about who he
is?
is? I'm not familiar with the name.
I'm not too familiar with him, but I know that I'm pretty sure he's into like browser fuzzing and stuff like that. He's
I
like
see some hypervisor fuzzing stuff here in his repo, so
yeah, I mean he's done. I think he talked in the stream that like browser fuzzing was where he started out. I don't know if he's still there,
yeah,
but
okay.
yeah, I know that he looks a lot at like low level stuff, and watching him go on stream was like he made me feel bad about myself because he was writing up scripts to do stuff in like 30 seconds that probably would have taken me like 5 minutes. But I thought it was pretty cool. So we're both kind of shutting out the paper and Gamozo Labs. I don't know if he's gonna put like a VOD up on that. It's probably up on his Twitch still. I think he keeps VODs. So if you go to his Twitch, you can probably see the VOD for that. I don't know if he plans to like put that on a more permanent platform like YouTube. But yeah, I think it's definitely worth checking out. But basically, the paper itself, I think it's hitting on an area that I think maybe should be looked at a little bit more. Though my biggest question, I think, um, is like, I think it's kind of a weird area to focus on. So they're focusing mostly on like the random generation, right? Trying to get that as fast as possible. And what I wonder is like, isn't that going to be a bottleneck? Or that's not going to be the bottleneck. I think that's going to be bottlenecked by something else.
Yeah,
Like,
and like I said, I mean, I think the bigger priority kind of comes down to fuzzing technique and like the generation.
definitely, yeah.
Like I was trying to touch on this a bit earlier, but I don't think it's a bad idea to look at performance like this. It's just I'm kind of going to hold the old wisdom that, at least in terms of what's interesting, the more interesting thing is what is like the newer techniques to do the fuzzing, newer ways to generate test cases, newer ways to judge how good a fuzzer is doing, newer ways to triage, and less about how fast you're getting through each of those loops.
Yeah. But I mean, even if we look at it from a pure performance standpoint, um, if you're generating test cases really fast, that's awesome. But if you can't run the test cases as fast as you're generating them, it doesn't matter because it's going to be bottlenecked by that anyway. So
Yeah, yeah,
I
that's a
kind of
good way
get
to
the
put it.
approach. I think it's cool that they're looking at it, but it might be worth looking into other areas, especially if you're looking at performance. I think it might be worth looking at some other components to try to optimize, not necessarily where they looked at.
Yeah, I mean,
So
you optimize your actual bottlenecks. I mean, it could be a bit premature. It's still interesting, like, and I mean that's the thing with a lot of research. It's not necessarily the most practical thing right now. Maybe in the
yeah,
future that will actually be a bottleneck, and that research is going to, been more important. It's still interesting. It's still cool to look at. I don't want to discourage that by any means. Not that I have that much influence, anyhow. That said, Sufficient does ask, what about quality of results and depth of coverage? I think you were bringing that up when we were talking about kind of what we're looking at with fuzzers and how speed of the actual test generation isn't the big deal. And yeah, I mean that's kind of the idea with all of the newer techniques and stuff, is ideally newer technique giving better results and better coverage, or a better way of detecting coverage. Depending, well, I mean, when you use coverage specifically, that's generally going to be your code coverage, maybe. And that's right now, that's kind of the standard metric to use. Maybe somebody's going to come up with a better metric besides code coverage. Um,
yeah,
I mean, it seems like the right metrics, though, so maybe not. But yeah, I mean, that's kind of the point there. Like, the quality of results is, I think, more important than how fast, because most people are running a ton of fuzzer, or at least most people that do a lot of fuzzing, are going to have like a rack fuzzing that's not just, and it's fuzzing for a long time. Like I had a friend of mine who was just trying to fuzz everything, like all of the GNU tools. And like that's not something you do overnight. It's just, it's going to run for like, here are all the issues I found after running this for 3 months, after 6 months, after a year.
yeah.
Uh,
One thing I will say though is that does raise a point of like, the more places you run the fuzzer and the more cores you're running on and stuff. Like, I should preface, these performance metrics are all for one core. They're not for multi-threaded. So I think the performance is worth looking at, just because when you scale, it scales, right? So if you get even a 10% performance increase on one machine or on one core, that's not huge. But when when you think about, if you're running it on like 8 cores or something like that, and you're running it on like 5 systems, that 10% is going to scale with all of those systems.
Yeah, I mean,
So
it still scales linearly, but yeah,
yeah,
it adds up.
yeah. So performance is definitely something that's cool to look at. But like you said, there are better metrics than performance to look at. And I did want to address something from chat, Sufficient, with the what about quality of results and depth of coverage.
That's what I
I
was just talking about.
Yeah,
And
but I
read that,
mean
yeah.
like, yeah, but I was thinking about it like in terms of the paper. I don't think the paper really mentions that. I think they're purely tunneled in on the performance aspect. I don't think they really touch it all on
Yeah, so the
the
question's
actual
raised in
results.
regards to our discussion of what the fuzzers are kind of looking for, what we're looking for with the fuzzers.
Oh, yeah, but I wanted to talk about it in the context of the paper as well, and that the paper didn't really talk too much about that. I think it was purely focused on the performance aspect. All right, so we'll move on to the performance of machine and deep learning classifiers in detecting zero-day vulnerabilities. So this paper was a little bit confusing in the title regarding like what it was about.
We don't usually talk about a lot of the content before we talk about here on stream. That way, if we have kind of questions in the back and forth, we kind of capture that. This one, though, we definitely had a little bit of discussion happen because it presents itself, detecting zero-day vulnerabilities. That's right there in the title. It talks about, what a zero-day is in terms of no known security patches and things like that. But the whole paper seems to be talking about malware that hasn't been seen before and does nothing about it, and not about the exploits that they use.
Yeah, so it seems kind of, I don't know if it's intentionally misleading, but
I don't think, see, that's the thing, actually. Some of their references, like even the Kaggle website, that references where it got its data set from. I'll bring it up. Actually, I forgot with the setup. Can't do the link here, but even from that, I think it referenced the references the zero-day vulnerability and zero-day malware. Now, we had actually talked with Antti a little bit about this. He was maybe a little bit more knowledgeable on that side of things, and usually zero-day malware is in reference to just new malware, not necessarily using some new exploit. And that seems to be kind of the case here, but there's definitely several places that use this idea of zero-day vulnerability and malware kind of interchangeably. This paper definitely seems to be talking about detecting new malware. It doesn't seem to do anything about the actual O-day exploits being used.
disappointed.
I was absolutely disappointed, but I was also kind of confused because it definitely starts off talking about the malware or talking about O-days, but when you talk about towards the end, I'll see if I can find exactly where it talks about it. I don't remember I can't find it, but it changes the definition part way through to be more what we're understanding it to be as it's detecting new malware, which is absolutely a useful thing. Just the titles is a bit misleading, and I feel like there's a terminology difference here that I'm just not getting. Anyway, I mean, with kind of that bit out of the way, the whole idea here is just looking at certain classifiers, both deep learning classifiers and machine learning classifiers, and how they basically classify malware or legitimate software. And the hope is to have something that classifies malware as malware and legitimate software as legitimate software. And it doesn't classify legitimate software as malware, and it doesn't classify malware as legitimate software.
Yeah, so no false negatives or false positives. Basically.
Yeah, but that's the idea. And it looks at things like, the size of the heap and the stack, imports and exports, basically a lot of stuff about the binary itself is what it tends to look at. We've got the feature, or kind of got the table here of the characteristics that it looks at. Anyway, so on the base of that, machine learning on it, they were actually to be pretty accurate.
I saw something like 99% or something, wasn't it?
Yes. And actually, I kind of agree with them. There's a bit of a surprise in that machine learning actually did so well compared to deep learning. So machine learning here with random forest, got up 99.51%. And this is when the data is standardized. They did find that non-standardized data did a little bit worse. Like instead of 99, it was 97% on that same, or in that same region. So a little bit worse when it wasn't standardized. So that's basically just kind of taking the data as is versus parsing it a little bit before they pass it into the, in this particular case, the machine learning. And yes, they found that the actual deep learning, the neural networks, those still did like 99, but 98%, just a little bit lower than the machine learning. And actually with non-standardized data, a lot worse, like 50 some percent. So I thought that was really interesting because deep learning is generally considered to be more able to adapt to new data. So I guess if you're not familiar, like deep learning versus machine learning, and this isn't an area of my own expertise, but my understanding of it is machine learning is kind of a little bit more simple. It takes training data, usually labeled or something, and just kind of makes a statistical analysis on that and kind of makes decisions based off of that training data. Whereas a neural network or deep learning, which is using neural networks, kind of kind of model the human process or like human logic processing. Kind of have layers of logic that the incoming data will kind of form a path through and change paths to have different networks. So a lot of weird stuff going on, but essentially it can teach itself. It'll figure like, I've got this thing. This is probably being classified as wrong. Like it can detect some of its own errors, and it can learn from that. So usually deep learning is considered to be, more capable of adapting. So it's interesting that in this case, it was actually generally performing worse, but it was a lot more steady. Like it was, if you take a look here at some of the deep learning stuff like this one, they're all in the 98 percentile, or not percentile, just percent. Whereas the machine learning, some of the options were, 97 to 99, a bit more of a spread.
One question I have, I don't know if they address it in the paper or not, but like something we've talked a lot about on the show is poisoning, like using poisonous data sets. Yeah, adversarial attacks on the training of the AI. And I feel like this is one area where that would definitely be a very practical attack when you're talking about potentially implementing this in software to detect zero-day malware. Poisoning those samples is going to be of interest to like APT groups and stuff like that. So, do they talk about trying to?
I don't think so.
Have some
Not
sort
that
of
I recall.
I
don't recall anything of that. It's just taking the binaries as they see them.
Okay, because I think that would be like something that should be considered.
This would be something that's kind of being done by an antivirus. That's just kind of like, hey, I see this binary, let's take a look at it and kind of just run the analysis like this. This doesn't do behavioral analysis at all, which is what a lot of antiviruses are doing now.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm trying to think about what the adversarial attack would look like against some of these, like, because the adversarial attack is still going to be either a legitimate binary or a malware binary. Like, I guess that's one of the big differences. A lot of the classifiers and stuff, like, they have a lot of different things something could be classified as, whereas this is a bit more binary, yes or no. I feel like that might limit kind of the ability to do adversarial attacks. I mean, I'm not confident in that, like in saying that. We talk about AI quite a bit.
Yeah, like I don't know how exactly you pull off the attack, but like I just see it being it's compared to some of the stuff we've talked about, it's a lot easier to inject malicious samples in a case that would be using this than in the cases we've talked about in the past. So like it's easier to inject those samples, and there's more of a motivation for it if you can trick the deep learning to classify a malicious binary as legitimate. You probably wouldn't want to go like from a practical standpoint. There probably wouldn't be too much use of trying to make legitimate binaries look malicious. That would just be kind of counterproductive.
Well, I feel like so now that I'm thinking about it, actually, I think what you might want to do if you were to try and attack a deep learning system, is what you'd want to do is, do you remember? I think it was one of our first episodes. We talked about backdooring, where you'd have these subtle changes, kind of like this it was an overlay over the image, where if it saw that, it would always detect it as like a stop sign or something. I can't remember what it was.
I
But
remember it vaguely. Yeah, it was
yeah,
at the
so
beginning of the year, right?
I'm thinking something like that could be done here. So you create a bunch of completely legitimate binaries that all have this certain little flag in it, some little piece of data, some signature to them. And you have like, you create thousands of binaries that end up getting scanned like this, such that the training, or tens of thousands, such that it'll train on that binary, and it'll eventually create that link that this string of bytes means it's legitimate. And then you would create your malware, and you would include that backdoor that you tried to implant. That, I think, could be a valid attack here.
Damn, that'd be really cool to pull off. That'd be some next level research. Do they have anything? I don't think they like open source any code, right? This is
No,
all
and I
just kind
don't
of theory.
I'm not sure how used this is like in practice yet. Because they don't
Yeah.
actually talk about any software doing this, just about whether or not you could use classifiers and train classifiers on it.
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if this actually does get implemented or like tested into something. I think that'd be cool to look at on a stream or something. I don't know if that'll happen. It's
So
just
I
kind
mean,
of
I
me,
think
like,
some IDSs will
brainstorming.
do it. Not for malware exactly, but for detecting attacks. I feel like that might be somewhere you could do one of these backdoor attacks on, and that might be interesting to look at.
Okay. Yeah. I think they should have maybe at least mentioned that in the paper, because that was like the first thing I thought about, right? Like, I think I, I feel like there's too many people looking into machine learning and AI and stuff and not considering adversarial attacks. We've covered a lot of adversarial papers, but we're also looking for them. I think they're in most cases people are just thinking about using this like, hey, it'd be cool to use AI here.
Yeah,
Let's
I
not think
feel
about
like
how it could be abused.
a lot of the big AI systems though do train with adversarial data. That's something I didn't
Okay.
recognize at first, but yeah. So, like a lot of the open source stuff isn't going to do that, or if you're just setting up your own training data. But like at the industrial scale, like in terms of like what Tesla does and stuff, like they do train with adversarial data. It's not, um, it's not as vulnerable to these sorts of things.
Okay. So we'll move on to our last white paper of the day, which is PARAM. And this is a microprocessor hardened for power side channel attack resistance. So this is basically trying to prevent people from side channeling through stuff like DPA, which is differential power analysis. So you basically side channel the power consumption to try to detect information at like the bit level.
Yeah, and that's actually, just since you mentioned the bit level, that's kind of an important thing. Like if you're able to detect when a 1 or a 0 is going through, some module, some little area is being computed, you're able to kind of extract bit by bit what's going on. You don't really, I think if you understand that's done bit by bit, it makes a bit more sense than trying to imagine like pulling out an actual like number. It's like, no, it's bit by bit. Um, that you kind of do that. Just wanted to make mention of that. Go ahead.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, differential power analysis and stuff like that, it's always been kind of black magic for a lot of people. I know a little bit about how it works, but like most chips and stuff, they do, if they have DRM and stuff like that, they will try to have like anti-tamper stuff on that. They try to prevent people from messing with the chip to do DPA and stuff like that. But yeah, so this microprocessor is trying to prevent stuff like that. And they say that there are some existing chips out there that do this, but they say that all the countermeasures that are out there target crypto algorithms. So what a lot of these kinds of attacks are used for is to like recover private keys, like AES or something like that. And they say that countermeasures are, deployed to protect against that, which does raise a question of, it seems their paper tries to go to protect data that's not crypto related. So like more
Well,
sensitive
so
data
it
still, but not
protects
cryptos.
crypto data, but it protects everything. Like it's not a change to the crypto implementation or like to the crypto hardware itself. It's more overarching. It's just everything's protected by default.
Yeah, but what I wonder is, like, they say that all countermeasures target crypto algorithms, and
Did
I
they
wish
say
they were
all or
more.
most?
I think they said all.
Okay, I thought they
Um,
said most, but either way.
but
I
like,
mean, that's kind of the most important piece of data usually. It's, your smart card or whatever will have a crypto key on it. Um and
yeah.
that's what they're trying to protect. Like usually that's the sensitive information when you're talking about this type of hardware.
But what I wonder about is, they say, like, I wish they were more clear on what's so specific about crypto stuff that makes those types of countermeasures less effective on other types of data.
Well, it's usually
Um,
just they'll rewrite the algorithm so that it doesn't perform certain types of operations. Like you would
okay.
write it so that it doesn't branch based off of the key. Like it doesn't do any like load the key and then do a branch based on like, oh, okay, if it's less than this value, do this. If it's this value, do that, which would give away information about. Like, so you would write your code in a way that doesn't branch based off sensitive information, as one example of how you'd rewrite it. It's just that it's specific to an algorithm.
Okay. See, I feel like they should have mentioned that in the white paper
I'm
where they
pretty
said
sure they
that.
do actually.
Do they? Like, where they
Yeah,
said
well, they
it?
they
Because I
talk
was looking
about
for
the
it.
brand. Well, they talk about that one in particular. They actually talk about that when they're talking about how they go about patching some of the leaks.
Okay.
Anyway, I think it is worth kind of mentioning here that their process here is, they're trying to design a chip, so evaluate their kind of process reasonably straightforward of evaluate side channel vulnerability of an open source design, identify modules that leak the most, and then patch or apply countermeasures to those modules. When it comes to evaluating, what they've kind of proposed here is this plan framework, power attack leakage analyzer, which takes kind of in a source RTL, the register transfer level stuff, so like Verilog, something like that design, and a benchmark application, and then just tries to estimate information leak based on each module. It goes through that. It'll kind of go and identify a ground truth, just like essentially it'll look at the bits and it'll determine what an attacker would like to see, and then it compares what you actually see with this ground truth that it developed, and if it sees a close relationship or a linear relationship between those two things, then it knows there's a leak. One of the interesting things is when it comes to the findings, it had a few different findings, but the one that I thought was interesting is that I found that some of the EDA tooling, so the stuff that translates the RTL into like the logic gates and everything. This isn't really my area, so I'm being vague about it. But that translation, which I feel like is almost like a compiler, actually it'll introduce translations that are functionally correct, but they actually introduce side channels. So where I mentioned the branch prediction stuff, it turns out that some of the EDAs would actually introduce branch predictions on the AS keys, despite the actual AS implementation having no branches dependent on the key. Same deal with floating point operations. So it would actually introduce some side channels just in the tooling level. So all of your Verilog is going to be correct and not an issue, but when it actually becomes hardware, suddenly you've got memory leaks. And it had some other findings that they found, like a memory hierarchy, mostly talking about like cache misses, register files, interstage buffers, some ALU operations, and the translations that I already mentioned. It's just kind of the findings that they had there, and then the last step is going through to patch. Their solution here with this whole chip is kind of based around a couple things. It's based around one idea, and that is just obfuscating data. By essentially, it seems like it's just XORing it with some key. In doing so, it's a little bit more than that, but it could reduce leakage in data ops. Basically, by obfuscating it, it breaks the correlation between the actual data and the data that gets processed. And the other thing, as I mentioned, the cache misses were one of the findings that it had. From that, it would, by obfuscating the addresses, or part of the address, it would split up the address and the offset. essentially leading to the same thing being held in cache in separate places or as part of separate caches. Like the same address would get mapped to different cache sets. I think is what they actually mentioned. So by doing that, then your cache hits and misses are separated or not as correlated to the actual data anymore. And they do that obviously with an obfuscation function and a remapping unit that actually handles changing the key to remap data, or like to come up with different addresses or the obfuscated address. And their other patch modifying BlueSpec to actually prevent some of those translations. Sound like you're about to say something?
I was just gonna say, like, that sounds pretty cool. And like, obviously when you're talking about these kind of chips, one of the big things is like overhead, which they mention towards the end of the paper.
Well,
And
they
say
mentioned
that
at the beginning saying it's negligible. It is not negligible.
Okay, so interesting. We'll talk about that because I was going to say, like, they say that the overhead is low, and they think that it can be reduced even further by optimizing how they do what you were talking about. But go on about that because I actually didn't catch that one. So yeah,
Yeah,
go into
so
that if
at
you
the
can.
start, I'm pretty sure they call it as being fairly low. So the thing is, like, in actual numbers, it's about 15 megahertz, which is reasonably low. Like, if somebody mentioned knowing about computers these days, 15 megahertz is not a lot. That said, that's 15 megahertz on top of what was 33 megahertz.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a lot more important on a
45% increase.
microprocessor.
Yeah, it's 45% increase. That is significant. If you're using a
Yeah,
processor that like fairly underpowered, a 45 increase does seem pretty high to me.
yeah, because when you're thinking in the context of like a desktop CPU where you're getting like 3.4 gigahertz clock rates,
Yeah,
15
that's not
megahertz is not
much.
much. But in a microprocessor, which is the entire focus of their paper, yeah, okay, I
Yeah,
can
well,
see
I
what you mean
mean,
by that.
if you take it as 15, whatever, but when you compare it to the original 33,
Yeah,
that's where I feel like, no, that's a significant difference.
yeah,
Like, it does seem to work, to be clear. It does work, differential power analysis. They don't do much about any leaks that are just simple power analysis.
okay,
And that's one they mentioned that as one of their limitations. They don't detect those more minute things that he might do with just or with that simple power analysis. Um, the other thing is anything that's like a nonlinear correlation between data. I don't know about much research actually into nonlinear attacks. I feel like because most attacks are linear, nobody's really done much with that yet. It's just kind of like in theory, this problem exists, and we might see it as they start patching the more linear issues.
yeah. I do want to go on a little bit of a mini rant about like a little critique on the paper. It's not huge. It's not what you just mentioned. It's on top of that. It's like one problem I have with some of these white papers, especially the ones when you're talking about CPUs and side channels and stuff like that, is they'll use terminology and they just expect people to know what they're talking about. And in a white paper, I think it's your responsibility if you're going to use something like an acronym, you need to state what the acronym means before you use it. Like, once you clarify what it means, then feel free to use that acronym throughout the rest. Like, I'll give an exploit example. In my write ups, if I talk about ASLR, I will first say address space layout randomization, ASLR in brackets. And then, that way people who are not familiar with that terminology know what it means. They use quite a few terms in here. Like one was a lookup table, LUT. They just use those terms without actually saying what they are. So you kind of have to like go and do your own research into the terminology to understand some of what's in the paper.
Yeah, I mean,
And that kind of hurts the accessibility of it.
unless it was something that they defined, like they explained what the plan meant and what param meant. But yeah, even like I mentioned RTU, EDA. I mentioned what those stood for. The paper doesn't. The paper just uses them, and yeah, that's kind of just bad writing. Even if you don't describe what they are, just describing your acronyms is usually just a fairly standard thing to do just first time you use it, write it out completely. Kind of funny. I just since we're talking about it at the very end here, this related work section, the seminal work on differential power analysis, DPA. That's
They put it at the very end.
Yeah, it's a few pages from the end here, it looks like. So they've described it there, but I'm pretty sure they use DPA up at the top here somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, part of the reason why it's a problem...
They do say differential power analysis early on, so that's fair. But
okay.
No, I mean, your point is fair, though. Like, they do use a lot of terms without bothering to define them, or not making it clear where it's being defined. And that did make this hard to read. I had to have Google to check what certain things meant and try to figure out. And, some things aren't too easy to Google.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Part of the problem is, some of these ones, like...
well, how
LUT
easy would have been to just Google LUT?
That's what I mean. It doesn't come up. You have to Google it in the context of FPGAs, which is field programmable gate arrays. If you don't look it up in that context, you're getting stuff that's not even remotely close to what you're talking about. So
LUT processor also works. Lookup table comes up.
Yeah. So I mean, it's just something I wish, like, I think if you're writing a white paper, that is a responsibility that, you should be looking through and clarifying those.
Yeah, well, usually that's done in like the introduction back, because white papers, research papers usually have that whole background information section. That's usually where and this one has one too.
Yeah, so,
I totally agree with you.
Yeah. Overall, though, I think what they're trying to do is cool. I don't want to shit on what they're trying to do, but I think the paper could have been written better. Yeah. All right. So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about there. I don't know if you have anything else to add on.
No, that's our last topic.
All right. So going back, we talked about it a little bit earlier, but we'll talk about it again. The last couple of weeks, we haven't really been doing the streams on the Fridays like we were planning to do, just because of some technical issues. This week, we should be back on track for that. If Z can't do anything, then I'm going to try to get something going for that.
Yeah, this week I won't be able to, so that's going to have to be you going.
Okay, so I'll be doing the Android. We'll be looking back into trying to do a debugger without a custom-built kernel, which I think is pretty cool. So we're going to be looking into that on Friday, potentially Wednesday, but I'm not going to say for sure because I might not. I'm busy with a few projects at the moment. But on Friday we should be doing that. So be sure to tune into that.
Kind of just make mention, if you have any ideas, things you want to see, either exploits you want us to look at, tech stacks you want us to look at. So like Spectre obviously has, I guess now I'll say you have some of the Android background, but you've got some of them with the console background stuff too. I've worked professionally kind of doing AppSec auditing and assessments for a fair chunk of time. So if there are things you'd like us to take a look at, that is kind of what we want to do streams of, just exploring different techs, exploring vulnerabilities. So if you've got that, leave them in our YouTube comments or Discord or whatever. But we're open to suggestions for content.
Yeah, definitely. And the only other thing is that blog post that Z put up for the Black Friday stuff. I think some of you may find that interesting. It's kind of like it's going to be like a central page where you can find things that are related to security.
I'm going to add a bit more on that and not actually just have it as point form. I'll add links and stuff into it. I just want to have something up really quickly for, the podcast.
Yeah. So be sure to check out our blog and our Discord. And we're going to be doing some more YouTube content.
Just mention day0sec.com for the blog.
Yep.
Links are below, but depending on where you're listening, you might not have those.
Yeah. So I think that's pretty much it. We're gonna so I mentioned it a bit earlier as well, but I'm gonna be working on that supercut this week, I think, for the Android binder streams. Try to get that up for the end of this week, if not beginning of next week. That's like my target goal. So be on the lookout for that. We'll mention that on Twitter and stuff like that when it's up, and on Discord. So but that's it for the Day Zero podcast. So if you're going to check us out on Friday, we'll see you guys then. And if you're waiting for the next podcast, we will see you guys next Monday with episode 20.